Resident Evil, the icon of survival horror and action horror games, with a history spanning across the past 30 years. And for those new here, Resident Evil is one of, if not my favorite franchises in gaming. I've been playing the games ever since RE4 on the Wii, so I got a bit of a connection here. And so to celebrate this franchise, I thought to myself, what better than to rank every last game to release as of 2026? And yes, I mean every game. Don't you worry, I didn't miss a single game this time. Not one. I checked Wikipedia, and we know they'd never lie to me. I do want to set some ground rules for how this is gonna go, however, that way you all know what to expect. For one, there is 30 games here, so these aren't gonna be full-fledged reviews of the games. I really tried to narrow down my thoughts to keep the runtime as brief and reasonable as possible, while also giving at least the mainline games a fair amount of time, which if you've peeped the runtime of this video, you can tell I didn't do a good job. However, I do want to talk about these games more in the future, and at least for the mainline games, I want to make a retrospective-like video for each game, so that also plays a part in keeping my thoughts brief, and I do mean that. I won't be able to get to them all right away, but those are videos I absolutely will make. Number 2, the ranking itself. I feel it's a bit important to explain because I got way too many comments acting as if B tier was a bad ranking the last time I made a ranking video, but also because I think it's just good to establish what each ranking means to me, since all of ours will differ. S tier. These games are my favorites. I love these games, and I think they are some of the best. A tier. I love these games, they are great. They have a few little issues or nitpicks that make it just shy of being S tier. B tier. I love these games, they are good, but they have more stuff holding them back than those that are in A tier. C tier. I might love these games, they are just okay, but there is still something there to appreciate. D tier. I do not love these games. They are kinda buns, but not irredeemable trash. F tier. I don't think I gotta explain this one. If a game manages to get here, I don't think I have to really explain why. And with that, make sure to like the video if you like what you are seeing here today. Subscribe too if you're interested in anything that I have planned going forward. Feel free to comment down below your own ranking too. I love seeing how different RE fans rank the games. Also, one last thing, huge spoiler warning for every game. Every game's getting spoiled here. But now, let's kick this ranking off.
Resident Evil.
In the beginning. Born on March 22nd of 1996, Resident Evil, the game that started it all. My first experience with the story was the remake of this game, and everyone around me always told me the remake pretty much replaced it. And after playing this game entirely for the first time, I don't agree with that sentiment in the slightest, though I do understand it. And I will admit I do prefer the remake by quite a wide margin. That said, I don't think this is even a remotely bad game. Quite the opposite. I had a lot of fun with my time here. I'm gonna compare this game to the remake a little bit, but only in regards to the scale of the Spencer Mansion and the difficulty of the game, because I do think the Spencer Mansion in RE1 is great. I really like how colorful it is. It's given a bit of that haunted house kind of vibe. I think it also has one of the best layouts of a location in probably any game in the series, at least top 5, maybe a little lower. I do think the remake definitely improves upon the Spencer estate tenfold with the added locations and whatnot, but for a first outing, this is pretty good. The game holds up way more than I thought it would. Sure, it looks very primitive in the visual department compared to the newer games. Audio quality is not great by today's standards. But who cares about all of that? It's a fun-ass game. But don't let this game fool you though, because when it came to scares, this game definitely got me a lot more than I thought it would. The classic zombie getting back up after you just mag dumped it works every time. In terms of enemy design and variety, it's pretty solid for a first entry, even if a bit low. You got the regular zombies, the dogs, the hunters, and the chimeras, which I feel were extremely underutilized. It's definitely low compared to the rest of the series, although there are some newer, later entries that you could argue have less than even this game. And some of them definitely reserve their spot in hell, but you gotta be a little fair about it in the first game in the series, especially when there is some legitimately good enemies in this game. The Chimera, if you couldn't tell, were probably my favorite design-wise, and I just loved how threatening they were. Probably one of the more difficult regular enemies to deal with besides the hunters. And then the difficulty side of things. Yeah, Jill and Chris kind of play differently, and Chris has less inventory space and whatnot, with Jill having less health and the lockpick and whatever else, which definitely do tweak the difficulty of the game a little bit. But also, this game I noticed gives out way more ammo than the remake does, and I kind of like that. While sure, it definitely doesn't make the game more of a survival horror, it kind of waters it down a little bit. The game also does get very generous when it comes to herbs. Like, there will be certain areas that will have like 3 green, 3 red, and 2 blues, and it's just like, okay man, because I don't even have enough space for this. Story-wise, I mean, come on, it's the Resident Evil. It'd be redundant to say this game has some of the funniest line delivery in a video game, but I'm here saying it anyway and giving an example.
Jill, this house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
Do you think we could see Tyrant now?
Barry, you're so optimistic.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
I feel like from the jump, the tone of this game was just not really taking itself too seriously. It had a real B-movie kind of horror flick kind of vibe, if that makes sense. Supposedly, the voice acting turned out this way because the VAs were just given their lines without any context for the scenes. I found that on a Reddit post from 6 years ago, so how true that actually is, I have no idea. But the voice acting and the writing gives the game a lot of charm that is sort of missed in the remake. And while I definitely appreciate the more serious tone of the remake, I had a blast when it came to the performances. Barry is my favorite character though. Like, not even because he's funny too, but also some of his line deliveries are just way better than a lot of everyone else's. I also really dig the FMV intro and outro and stuff because, I don't know, I think that adds a lot of charm to it as well. Sure, in the beginning it's really over the top and stuff and makes it feel more like an action movie, but I think it's really fun to have in the game, and I kind of wish that we still got some FMV stuff in Resident Evil games. The music in this game, on the other hand, was unironically just good. Now, I played the GOG version, so I didn't get to have my ears blessed by the director's cut, but there was just some good music here. I don't really know how to explain it in a way that makes sense, but I guess the best way I could is saying that it's music I would listen to even when I'm not playing the game. The credits theme was a nice treat to end the game on. I liked the vibe that it gave off. The music that played in the lab when it was set to self-destruct went stupid. Seriously, what a great track to build up tension and adrenaline to get you to rush your way to escape.
All researchers and guards, take cover immediately. Unlock all rooms.
But my favorite will always be the mansion basement theme. No, not the director's cut version. That's a second favorite. It barely sounds like actual music. It will continue to have these loud knocks, giving the impression that something is there and it is coming for you. Also, I think the track would sound phenomenal as a sample for a beat, so there's that too. Now, this is a Resident Evil game, so of course you're gonna have those boss fights, and they're fine for the most part. I don't think there was any fight in this game that really stuck out to me, at least for being bad, but also some of them just didn't stick out as a fight as well. Both Tyrant fights, while I think both of them are pretty good, I think I like them more just because of the context of what was happening in them. And, you know, I don't say it in the remake segment, because I kind of recorded these and played these games out of order. But yeah, I felt the same way about it in the remake. I really just like the set piece of fighting the first Tyrant and the importance that has on the story and the lore. I think that is what makes the fight cooler to me. But in the first fight, he's fine. You can take him down pretty easily. For me, it took, 3 flame rounds? And then the fight on the rooftop where he just decides to cheat and sprint at you at full speed, which still took about like 3 flame rounds and like a magnum shot or 2, which, yeah, saying that, like using some of the best guns you can get your hands on, yeah, of course that would make him easier. I don't want to know how many shots it takes from the pistol to kill him. Yawn is an enemy that does stick out in my mind though, the giant snake. He shows up twice, and between the 2 fights, I think the first fight is the one I prefer. The second fight, he just kind of fell over. It was pathetic. Like, I just hit him a few times with the shotgun and then boom, he's gone. But the first fight actually had a bit of a challenge. The environment, the level design, you did have a little, like, things that would get in your way, and then he would, of course, body block you and poison you. But it was a good fight. I can't really critique Black Tiger because I believe his shit's smooth off. And then there's Plant 42. I mean, it's a plant. I don't feel any type of way about him. Again, I'm not saying that these were bad fights by any means. If I was to say anything, I'm more so surprised by how not bad they were. Going into this, I was a little weary about the tank controls and how awkward it would make certain interactions. Since this was one of the few only mainline and important titles in the series I had never really played, and my concerns were almost immediately washed away. Every fight feels good. Every encounter feels good, if that makes sense. Even if the tyrant starts cheating on that rooftop, it's really easy to get away from him and avoid taking damage, so it works out. Which leads to my next point, tank controls. I'll probably touch on them a little bit in the next 2 titles, but this is a lot of modern RE fans' worst enemy. They talk about tank controls like it murdered their family, and for the longest time, I never really cared for them myself. Even if my favorite game in the series had them, I was never going to be against them, but I definitely started having more of a preference towards the modern feeling games. But I will say right here, right now, that I think this game feels immaculate with the tank controls. Like, once you start getting the hang of them, it really just clicks with you. Everyone that said you get the hang of them within 20 minutes were just absolutely correct. It's very easy to get the hang of them and get used to them. Obviously, for people that have never played games with tank controls, it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel weird. The first couple interactions might not go out the way you want them to. But I think that's part of the experience. Learning how to use the tank controls and then mastering them and then mastering the experience. In a way, I think that in itself adds to the horror as well. But then you got the fixed camera angles, which, yeah, some of them do kind of suck, but that's kind of the point. They're meant to emphasize that horror, and I guess a lot of people don't really like that, which is fine, it's fair, it's a preference after all. But some of these shots definitely make the game feel more cinematic. It feels like you're playing an interactive movie if it had gameplay. And of course, I still had my moments of stupidity with the tank controls and the fixed camera angle. I saw people that were going online saying that the tank controls are hated because they require more brain activity. No, they don't. I'm proof of that. Some other smaller gameplay elements that I noticed that I'm bringing up. Shotguns actually one-shot up close, like every single time. Sensational. The remake doesn't always guarantee this, which is really funny, but damn is it satisfying in this game. It has like this punch sound effect too, making kills feel so good to get. It reminds me of like getting kills of like Titanfall, because that had a similar sound effect. At this point, I'm just yapping to yap. I don't want to blow my load too much with this game because, as I mentioned in the intro, I want to eventually do full like big videos on each of the mainline games. So let's get this thing started and place the first Resident Evil game in A tier. It's not my favorite, and I think the remake is my preferable way of playing RE1, but I had a good time with it and see it as a very important video game to the medium as a whole. But personally, I just don't think it's S tier worthy. Very close though, very close to that. Moving on.
Resident Evil 2.
Finally, it's time for that real shit. Resident Evil 2 released back on January 21st of 1998 here in North America. And I don't think I have to say it, you already know where this game's going, but I'm going to justify an already agreeable placement anyway. I do want to say originally I did play this game like normally without anything going on in it, but every clip that I took got corrupted, so all my footage that you're seeing here now is just me discovering that there was an infinite ammo cheat and I'm just going manic with it, so enjoy that. But I'd say this is one of the best sequels to a video game, possibly ever. One of the best survival horror games ever at that as well. Visually, it's a step up from the first game. Characters are more detailed, environments are larger and more detailed, and even can contain more enemies on screen. I would say the audio quality is better too, but it's still a little crunchy, and apparently the PC version's worse than the PlayStation version. That's what I heard. I have no proof on that. I can't confirm that. But you know what I want to talk about first, and it's probably the only game that I'm going to do this for, and that's the music. I think this is the best soundtrack in the series. There are a couple that I think are close. RE1 had a great one, make no mistake, but if you heard this one, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It definitely does lack a certain track that provides that feeling of anxiety that the original Basement track did, but there is some that are also really close to that one in quality. And to make up for lacking a track that was maybe as good as the Basement from RE1, I think this is the best save theme in the entire series. The only ones I ever consider close to secure place are like RE7, 4, and 1 in 1 remake when it comes to save themes, but I still have secure place above them. It has this perfect blend of a somewhat relaxing tune while you are in a save room, while still having hints of uneasiness, just to remind you that you aren't truly safe, and you don't really know what's out there. Also, it just goes hard. I don't know what else you expect me to say. And you could argue that Secure Place isn't even the best song on the entire soundtrack when the front hall exists. A scene that gets elevated to such a degree because of one song choice. A toothpick really changes everything, man, I tell you. It gives off that feeling of mystery and intrigue. Like, I need to know what lurks behind every corner in here. Yet also, a feeling of just being unsafe. You know, it's great. It works very well. I think a top contender for one of the best on the soundtrack too is also Sherry's theme. It has such a warm, hopeful vibe to it, and it plays during a pretty difficult and desperate moment as well. Yet it instills that feeling of hope to keep pushing through the nightmares and make it to the end. The atmosphere is just some of the best this series has had. The game will even have its moments where, like the first game, they just strip the game of its music and then you just hear footsteps and like other sound effects to be more ambient and whatnot. And then there's also the more atmospheric tracks, which are less like music, which work very well. Moving on to other aspects of the game, the story and voice acting. I mean, it's an early Resident Evil game. It is really difficult to hold these earlier games to a high standard compared to what we get now, but I don't think the story is downright terrible. In fact, I think the fact Leon even interacts with Sherry at all in this game is the one thing that I just love about it, and what I dislike the remake for not fully adapting into its story, even if the remake story is a lot cleaner, fleshed out, and paced better in comparison. In the beginning, the game did feel a little bit breakneck when it came to the pacing. I kinda get why. They really just want to get you into the gameplay, and these Resident Evil games didn't really have much of an emphasis on story. You definitely see it more and more as we get more games, but still, in the early days of the series, the stories weren't anything to write home about. Every time I replay the game, I always forget how quick they are about getting you into the game too, which I'm not complaining about at all. I think it works very well here, but I always also forget that Marvin has like 2 scenes and nothing more. So on that front, I will hand it to the remake for giving Marvin's character more emotional weight to it, I guess, for Leon's story. Irons also just doesn't have a whole lot to do either, but that leads me to my next point, the voice acting. While in RE1, the voice acting blew chunks but was entertaining, it still kind of blows here, just not nearly as much. Some will say it's bad, and at times it can be. I love Paul Haddad's voice acting. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right. Rest in peace to him. But they will have him insert lines into a conversation that make the scene a lot funnier than it should be.
Claire? Where am I?
It worked!
But overall, I think he's a really underrated voice for Leon. Allison Court's performance as Claire definitely took some time getting used to again, though. I never understood why. I just never really cared for her voice to begin with. It definitely grew on me as I was replaying it a few times. But I must say, Gary Crawford's performance as Chief Irons is actually so good.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I thought you were another one of those zombies.
Are you Chief Irons?
Yes, that's me. And just who are you? No, don't bother telling me. It makes no difference. You'll end up just like all the others.
And dare I say, better than the one in the remake? No shade to whoever voiced Irons in the remake, but his voice was so memorable, and none of the lines ever came off as too cheesy or as terrible compared to everyone else's. Gameplay-wise, it was just like the first game, but bigger and better, and for some reason this version that I played had no auto-aim. I played the version on GOG and you just couldn't play with auto-aim. I would say this was done to make the game harder, but it really just felt like how the tank controls did for me, where it took a few minutes for me to adjust and then I was running through the game perfectly fine. Honestly, I think it was only a problem when fighting against the small enemies like the G-type, like whatever those tiny guys are and the crows. Like outside of those, like that might have been where it was a problem. There is quite a few new additions to this game as well, like the scenarios and the zapping system. It's been talked about to death, but I think this is a great mechanic. I wish it got fleshed out more in this series. I think you could have done something really cool with it. But it makes both scenarios feel different and prevents them from feeling like a slog to get through. You take an item in Claire A's scenario, you likely won't be in the Leon B's scenario. Pretty simple stuff. Honestly, when you're playing it, it doesn't feel too crazy, but I honestly just wish we saw this more in the series, because I think conceptually it's a really cool thing to have. The enemy variety in this game is even further emphasized as well. It's larger than the first game by a little bit, and I think what we get here is pretty good, though quite a few of these enemies feel more like one-offs than regular enemies, like the giant moth and the G-type adult. These might be like mini-boss enemies to some, but I don't know, seeing the G-type adult in the remake become a regular enemy for the sewer just made a lot more sense to me than it did in the original. This guy can kiss my ass though. I hate him and his kids. But this game introduces the world to the Lickers, and I love them. They get on my nerves regularly, but they are awesome. Just look at them. The evolved Lickers are cool too, even if it's just a palette swap and they can two-tap you, but I really like the change in color. I think design-wise, they're just really awesome. The Ivy to me are really cool as well. I love their design. These weird split-mouth plants, they slowly approach you and even spit acid at you. A flame round makes quick work of them, but I almost wish the lab specifically was longer just to see more of them. The boss fights, well, they are about on par with the original for me in terms of quality. I did like Birkin's third form. I thought he had a great design, and I thought he had a decent fight. Fourth form kept one-tapping me, but even then, pretty nice boss fight, good challenge to it, great finale to the A scenario. His second form on the train was also pretty cool too, at least from his visual design. Boss fight itself, it was okay. The alligator had me really confused too. For one, I couldn't stop laughing at the static alligator that just spontaneously grows in size.
Sherry!
But two, I thought you could kill him with flame rounds, but then I learned that you gotta knock the canister down and then you can blow his shit smooth off. The level design in RE2 I think is really good too. It absolutely peaks in the RPD, as I think the sewer and lab can't hold a candle to it, but I think the opening of the game having you in the streets of Raccoon City in disarray is the perfect opening. Crowded with a ton of enemies, only one magazine to your name, and you are left with only really one option, and it's to run. The RPD is a really fun area to explore. It's huge, just like Spencer Mansion, which is pretty comparable to it in size as well, and the pacing of this area is just as good, if not better. One of the most satisfying things in a Resident Evil game is unlocking all the pathways to create new paths and shortcuts to get around the main area quicker. And I think this game is arguably one of the best at that. There's so many different pathways you can take, so many different rooms to go into, so many different opportunities to get jumped by zombies and whatnot. And this game also gets really comfortable with just placing way too many zombies in a room for you to handle. The puzzles too are pretty easy, all things considered. None of them had me needing a guide. The sewers doesn't last long enough for me to have any deep opinion on it. It had a few spiders, the alligator. It was okay. The lab is a similar story, but it's not only the end of the game, but visually it stands out better, and I really like its atmosphere, so it slightly edges the sewers out for me. Overall, a fantastic entry. You ever just play a video game where you feel honored that you lived at a time where it was playable? That's me with this game. It's my personal favorite out of the classic trilogy, and probably my top 3 favorite RE games ever, and for that, I will be making Resident Evil 2 the first S tier of the video. Moving on.
Resident Evil.
Released on November 11th of 1999 here in North America, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. And by God, they did it again. Despite the time crunches and development issues that plague each and every one of these games, the fact that they came out all as quality games as they did right after another is quite impressive to me still. Granted, the development times back in the 90s are unheard of today, with both RE2 and 3 releasing within less than 2 years apart from one another. This was the game I was most excited to get back into playing for this ranking. I played it for the first time after playing the remake all those years ago, and while I thought it was just fine when I played the remake, I thought the original was so cool. The opening with the streets of Raccoon City is so cool to me. It's a pretty huge map to explore, which from a visual standpoint alone is awesome, though it definitely becomes a pain in the ass to backtrack at times, just because of how big it is. But hey, they promote the upcoming Biohazard 4, so it balances out. I like the addition of the RPD here, not only because it's just nice to see again, even if it hadn't been long since we last saw it, but it also adds a bit of cohesion between this game and RE2, since it technically takes place a few days before. And they even cheat by reusing the front hall, which works so well for me because that is one of my favorite tracks in a game like ever. I think my favorite areas had to be the park and the clock tower though, even despite some of the most dog-ass puzzles I've ever seen in a video game. But despite those, I think they're great. And it really made me sad realizing that these two were completely absent from the remake and replaced by a sewer segment to copy off of RE2 remake and a nest facility that felt strangely out of place for the 90s, but that's neither here nor there. They both have the best atmosphere for me, but for polar opposite reasons. The clock tower, it's all the music's doing here with a hint of the visuals. For the park, it's 1000% the visuals. If I was a kid in 1999 playing this, I would have been terrified of something jumping out at me from behind the trees. Granted, I still sort of felt that way as an adult, but we pretend to be unbothered here. The hospital section where you play as Carlos, I don't hate. I think it's okay. It's extremely short in all honesty. Compare this to the remake, and this is one of the few things where I don't have a preference either way. But I think throwing the hunters and the gammas at us here is really fun. I really like the gammas too. I love their frog-like design much more than the hunters, even if they both resemble similar designs. Now, because it had been some time since I last played this game, I did forget how most of the music and atmosphere of this game was, and after finishing my playthrough of RE2, I thought to myself, how do you even follow that up? Like, genuinely, how could you? And yet I think it fares pretty well. Do I think it outdoes RE2's soundtrack? Not at all. But I think it's pretty close, and that is good enough for me. But my absolute favorite track in the entire soundtrack of this game is the Clock Tower. It's easily the most unsettling track the game has to offer. It always leaves me feeling such dread whenever I'm in here. And you can hear the chirps of other clocks very faintly in the background too. It works so perfectly for this location, and is the big reason why it's my favorite. I found the save theme in this game to be kind of a sleeper pick for one of the best in the series for me too. Not sure how the community rates it, but I feel I don't ever see it get brought up enough, especially not compared to 1, 2, and 0. But we gotta talk about one of the best aspects of this game. Yeah. Him. Nemesis is such a cool character. From the design, to the voice, to the music that precedes him when entering an area, he's almost perfected as far as being a big baddie in a Resident Evil game goes. Being the first actual stalker enemy in the series, though not like what newer RE fans are used to. Many say that he isn't, but he is most definitely scripted, but the way they present Nemesis to you is so well done to the point where it makes you fearing the idea of him popping up in areas that he's not even capable of spawning in. Whenever you enter a room, there will be a specific track that plays when it's in an area that he is in. It's a track that leaves you dreading what is out of sight in the area, and then you hear the words, stars, and you are forced to drop what you are doing and deal with this 7-foot tall moron with too much drip. with only two real options. Either fight him, risking health items and ammo with odds against you in the fight, but give a pretty good reward if you kill him, or try your hardest to outmaneuver him and run away, because from what I've learned, if you run a pretty decent distance away from him, he ends up disappearing. Nemesis is a hulking beast. I love this man so much. He is faster than you, hits the hardest of any enemy in the game, can even grab you after knocking you on the ground for a 1-2 combo. He's pretty evil. There isn't many boss fights in this game, which makes sense given it is easily the shortest game in the trilogy, but you have a few Nemesis fights and only one other true boss enemy, that being the Gravedigger. Now, I'm not a big worm guy, but this dude, he passes the vibe check. He has two boss fights. The first one is his introduction in this little sewer area underground. You gotta hit these switches, but he can pop out of these holes to bite you, and he is very aggressive, hits pretty hard, making it a very intense encounter. But the second Gravedigger boss fight, which is the one most people probably remember, which is in the park, is shockingly easy. Now maybe I was just stocked up on enough resources, or I was just too locked in to notice any challenge, but it felt way easier than his first encounter. It's not a bad fight, make no mistake. I think it's pretty cool having him go underground and then pop up on other ends of you to try and like catch you off guard and stuff. And in this tiny little arena, it's very intense. I just found it a bit easy. The final boss fight of the game, though, if you can even call it that, is just straight up disappointing and is one of the very few examples where I say the remake did it better. You gotta push these things into this thingy to power up this machine that just blows a hole into Nemesis, which is pretty similar to what the remake goes for, but the remakes was more challenging. There was a better spectacle all around, which I feel like is the bare minimum for a final boss fight. If you can't at the very least make it something interesting mechanically, at least make it a good spectacle. But here, he just kind of goes down. It's pretty sad. Enemy variety is okay. I had no issues with it particularly. You have your zombies, the crows can kiss my ass, the dogs weren't as annoying as they usually are in these games, but I swear, the brain sucker felt almost 1-to-1 to the drain demos. They look extremely identical. The only difference was they seem to take a little bit more firepower to take down, but otherwise just feels like adding in a new bug just to add one. But I do love the drain demos. The way they attack is so goofy after a bit, but at first they will really catch you off guard. It's kind of terrifying. In terms of other gameplay mechanics, the game did introduce ammo crafting, where you just combine different gunpowders with it and it creates ammo, and depending on the size of the gunpowder, gives you a larger stack of ammo, which is, for one, a great innovation upon the series that wouldn't truly be utilized till way later in the series. But it really dialed back the survival horror aspect, as you could just overstock your inventory with heaps of ammo if you crafted wisely. Me personally, I just went with the pistol ammo since it was the most common to get a hold of, but in all honesty, the game just kind of gives you so much ammo anyway that this game feels the least like a survival horror amongst the original trilogy, which I'm not fully opposed of. I think it further differentiates the experiences between the three games, but also because I do love when Resident Evil attempts action horror. The final gameplay element of importance here is the live selection moments that pop up during scripted moments in the game. There is, as far as I know, 10 of them that pop up, and they each come with 2 choices, or 3 if you're a fence-sitting coward. I like what this adds to the game. Certain choices can lead to you seeing different areas that can possibly have items for you, but most of them actually affect certain moments in the story. Nothing that is affected is anything that deeply affecting the plot, but it makes each player's experience different from someone else's. It makes RE3 one of the more replayable games in the series as a whole, just for giving you the urge to go back and make different choices to see the events play out differently. Or you can do nothing at all if you somehow waste that much time, but the game is pretty generous about it. My personal favorite decisions all involved pushing Nemesis off something like a clock tower or the bridge. The fact Jill can even shove this hulking beast is hilarious on its own, and it makes him look like a dumbass. Oh yeah, and I just kind of completely forgot to mention the dodge mechanic here. I mean, it barely works. It's a very inconsistent mechanic, high risk, very low reward, but it's also pretty fun to pull off and very satisfying as well when an enemy's attacking, especially someone like Nemesis, and you just perfectly dodge. I think it's fine, but yeah, it's not an entirely functioning mechanic a lot of the time, especially because there is no iframes. You can still get hit even in the middle of dodging. In terms of the story, it's not my favorite of the trilogy, but I love Nemesis, I love Jill, so I will take what I can get. The game takes place just a few days before the events of RE2 in the beginning of the game, with Jill trying to escape the collapsing Raccoon City, while also being hunted relentlessly by Nemesis. I think for what it's worth, it's enjoyable with some memorable moments between Jill and Carlos especially, and some pretty entertainingly bad voice acting and line delivery. Carlos I wasn't huge on initially. I think more people will walk away from both RE3s finding the remake to be the better character. At the very least, he is more likable in comparison, but I will say, I definitely do like how immature and unlikable and even inexperienced the original Carlos is. And I wish we got to see a bit of that in the early portions of RE3 Remake and kind of build into the Carlos that we end up getting. Nikolai, on the other hand, does anyone even like him as a villain? Like, he's fine. He's one of the more grounded villains in the series, so maybe that's why. I don't know. I don't think he's a bad villain, but outside of when he was in the helicopter, none of what he ever did stood out to me personally. Oh yeah, and before I forget, RE3 is technically the first Resident Evil game to introduce a side mode with the name Mercenaries. Now, it's different from what we see in later entries, but here you basically gotta make it from one point to the other, and you are under a time crunch, and it is pretty difficult. It's basically like the bonus scenarios in Resident Evil 2, and it's fine. I definitely do think we should see this come back in later entries, but it's not the worst side mode in the world. It's just not something I'm ever gonna come back to this game for. Overall, I found my replay of the original Resident Evil 3 to make me never want to stop beating up whoever thought it was a good idea to cut the clock tower out of the remake. But I had a blast playing it. Some say it's the weakest of the trilogy, and maybe that's true, but I really loved this. I loved things like Nemesis, the clock tower, and the live selection stuff so much to where the flaws that I may have missed just didn't bother me. But one thing playing these original titles helped me do was appreciate these games and the series as a whole more than I ever had before. And not even just Resident Evil, but learn to truly appreciate games of the past entirely. If you are new to the series, or even an old fan but never played the original trilogy, I really do recommend giving them a try just to say you did. It breaks my heart a bit seeing people discredit and just outright disrespect these older games in favor of the new ones without ever even playing them, just because these games have so much to offer, not just to the series, but in their own right. And on top of that, I think it's important we all experience art for ourselves and form our own opinions, instead of just parroting what someone else said and thinking that is the correct way to think. Whether you end up liking these games or not is entirely up to you, but I implore you all to go out there and play the games, especially with them being on GOG and Steam for $10 full price, and since it's Resident Evil, these things go on sale every other month. And also, due to them being old enough to have a fully progressed frontal lobe that makes them some of the easiest 3D games to emulate even on modern phones, and can run on just about any device. So go out there and give them a try. Tangent aside, I think for now I will place Resident Evil 3 Nemesis into S tier. This might change if I feel the S tier gets crowded, or I will forget about it, but we will see. Moving on.
Resident Evil Survivor.
On January 27th of 2000, Japan, and then later in August of the same year, North America, would see the release of the first Resident Evil spin-off, Resident Evil Survivor, and it was received very poorly. Survivor is a light gun shooter and is the first attempt at making a first-person Resident Evil game. I do not have a copy of this game, so we have to resort to unreliable emulation, which is probably what I'll have to do for most of these games. This is probably one of the most clunky feeling RE games that I've played, more so than the original trilogy. You still have the tank controls, which do not work for me in this game at all. They're definitely manageable, don't get me wrong. I learned to tolerate them, and I got used to it within the first like 10 minutes, but that doesn't mean I actually liked it, now does it? I definitely think a big part of why I don't like it is because of the level design. It's extremely linear, almost none of what you came to know from the games is present here. The gunplay itself, I think, it's fine. I'm not too familiar with light gun shooters. It's probably played better with a gun con, but, you know, I don't exactly have a gun con, and I don't have a PS1 to play it on. But there is some enemy variety here. I'll give it that. It mostly reuses enemies you encountered in RE2, like Ivy, the Evolved Lickers, but you even get new guys called the Cleaners, and whenever you kill them, they make strange noises. You even encounter tyrants here, and the first encounter is just really funny. There's no music or anything to coincide this appearance. There's no fanfare. He just approaches you so slowly, and you can just juke him very easily. There's even a fight with a Mr. X while you're waiting on an elevator too, and dude, it's so funny. You just keep lapping him in this big-ass room. It's hilarious. There is another area, though, where two of them show up. I know, two. And if you don't kill them right away, they trap you in a room. One of my issues with the game, though, has to be just how certain enemy placements are. Now, this might just come from a lack of experience with these kinds of games, so if that's the case, then that's on me. But quite often, you will enter a room with quite a few enemies, enough to cause the game to slow down, and you will not be able to hear it. But there will be an enemy out of sight just attacking you, which feels so bullshit to play against. I'm sorry, man. But even worse is enemies like the Hunter. I have no idea what their problem is, but every now and then one of them will stick onto you and try to body block you from getting away from any like door that you're trying to get to. I can't tell if this is impressive AI or just straight up stupidity, but I could go either way. Also, like picking up items and using doors feels very weird. For the case of doors, you just walk into the door and then boom, you're in another room. But in the case of picking up items, you have to walk over them, and a lot of times it just straight up does not work. You have to walk onto it a certain way, and in this one room where you encounter another tyrant, you have to pick up this key card. It took me like 5 tries to get that goddamn key card because it just would not work. I had to walk over it a certain way. What the hell is this? The story and voice acting, though, are some of the worst the series has to offer. Is it funny? Absolutely.
It's me, your mother.
My mother?
But it doesn't even really have the same campy vibe that the original trilogy had. Those games still felt like they were trying to replicate old horror movies with some cheesy acting and bad dialogue. Here, it just sucks. And the story doesn't even really get a chance to breathe because the game's under 2 hours long. There is some cool ideas here with having a detective getting amnesia so he forgets everything, then is led to think he is this Vincent guy who is a real bad guy. Now, let me tell you, the game will not let you forget that Vincent is a bad guy. But then finding out he isn't, does it make sense? No, not really. Not at all. But the idea is cool, and that is about it. The writing is really some of the worst. The notes are really bad. The original trilogy, I thought, had some decently written notes. There's some really good ones. This game, a lot of them just boil down to, man, Vincent, you know that Vincent guy? He's a bad guy, he's a bad man, let me tell you, he's a bad man. There isn't a whole lot to say about this game. The music it's fine. Graphically, it looks decent, but sometimes you can see the cracks start to show with things like loading in. But for a PS1 game that's like 3D and not using pre-rendered backgrounds like the classic trilogy, looks pretty good. I'm gonna place it into D tier. Did not have fun with this one. Moving on.
Resident Evil.
Initially released on the Dreamcast in Japan on February 3rd of 2000 and March 28th of 2000 in North America, Resident Evil Code Veronica. There is only one other game on this list that, despite the fact that I think it's a good game, it's also frustrating to play, skill issue or not. Code Veronica is a Claire Redfield game, so you already know. I can't put this game below C tier. This is a Resident Evil game that I don't feel all that enthused to replay whenever the time comes, and it comes down to a few things. One, I find the backtracking in this game to be at its worst in this era. It gets pretty tedious going from the palace all the way down to the prison, back to the palace to go into the private residence. It kind of just leans almost too much into backtracking at times. But then you have the moment when the game switches to Chris. The game doesn't really make it all that clear until the moment arises that the switch is going to happen, but I think the item box being shared between Chris and Claire is pretty good. It's just that you're really only going to prepare for it on replays. I will give the game some credit though. Visually, I think it's a lot better than I remembered it being. I think the game peaks visually when you reach the palace and the private residence and the underwater area where you enter from the submarine. I think that view when you first discover the private residence is some of the best visuals the game has to offer. I especially love the very eerie looking bridge that you have to walk across to get there. It looks like a haunted house, and the inside of it is even better. The palace is cool too though, a bit washed out, but it does have a casino which immediately puts it towards the top of the tier list. One thing I really don't like is the enemies. It feels like after a certain point in the game, whenever I walk out of a room and back in, it's like the enemies just got back up. And now, yeah, the previous games have done something similar, but it's not to the extent that this game does. I'm not sure if this is a feature or not. This is only my second time playing through the game in its entirety. Enemies just get back up what feels like immediately when you leave and re-enter a room. At least in games like RE1 and 2, it was still later on in the story when they would get back up, and it would be like different enemy placements in certain areas. At least that's what it felt like. I should also mention that what I've noticed about this is that it's only in certain areas where enemies actually do get up, and from what I've looked up online, that just seems to be the case, where it's only in certain areas and it's not all throughout the game. So maybe this issue is something I'm making out to be bigger than what it is, and maybe it's just kind of a non-issue, but I just wanted to throw that in there just to clear things up. But then you got guys like the Bandersnatch, which just suck. Conceptually, sure, it's cool to have a Mr. Fantastic type of enemy that just stretches his arm out and tries to grab you, but my god, is it annoying to deal with. The boss fights can be hit or miss too. I like Nosferatu, surprisingly. I think he was pretty sick. But the Tyrant fight on the plane? Easily one of the more difficult fights in the series, in my opinion. Though I think it's pretty funny to consider this a point to be soft-locked, because you can very much use the knife, which is actually not bad in this game. The story, on the other hand, is quite humorous, if I do say myself. It's all due to the voice acting. I mean, it's some of the worst we've gotten in the series.
Welcome, Claire. Consider the area you are in a special playground I have prepared just for you. Please try and keep me amused, and do not disappoint me by dying too soon. I so want to enjoy this.
Up there with the original RE1 and Survivor, seriously, I would argue it's probably worse than RE1. Maybe not worse than Survivor, because Survivor's a whole different level of bad. But I think the stuff with the Ashford twins is off the wall, even for Resident Evil. And I think that's a big part of this game's personality. It's a really bizarre game, from its voice acting to its story, and it's one thing I wonder if they are going to water down in the remake or outright remove, because I think it adds to a bit of that unsettling nature of the story and the Ashford twins themselves, and I actually do kind of like them in this game because of that. Although the game does have Steve.
Time to test out my new toy!
I don't like Steve, he drags the game down. I don't care, I hate him. He has one of the most grating voices I've ever heard in a game. I think the music is pretty good. I don't think it's the best we've ever gotten, but the save theme is easily up there, I think. I just like how relaxing it is. I think one other thing I want to point out, because I actually thought it was pretty cool when I noticed it, is how the camera shifts around in this game. Because this is one of the classic Resident Evil games, it still had the fixed camera angle, yet it wasn't anything like how RE1 through 3 did, or even 1 remake and 0 later on. The way the camera like shifts and moves around when you're like walking around and exploring, sometimes zooming out if the area is all big and wide, and sometimes zooming in if you're in a cramped hallway. I really did like how dynamic the camera was, and I think it really helps emphasizing the tension depending on where you're at, and it really helps with the atmosphere and everything, and I think it just works. Overall, I think Code Veronica is a good game, but I have my issues with it, and I just don't have nearly as good of a time with it as I had with the previous mainline games. It has a lot to like about it, but I'm going to place Code Veronica into B tier. Moving on.
Resident Evil.
Released in Japan as an arcade game on July 5th of 2001, Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. So fun fact, this game never released here in North America. It started off as an arcade cabinet in Japan, but would then get a home console release in Japan and Europe for the PS2. And you can absolutely tell, this game not only just feels nothing like the first Survivor game, this doesn't even feel like an actual home console game. I did have to play this through emulation, obviously, but even still, I gotta say, this game controls terribly. As an arcade game exclusively, I'd say it's pretty good. It has the arcade bullshit, the high difficulty, and everything else that you come to expect when playing a game like this. But under the context of it being a console release, one that I'd assume I'd pay full price for if I wanted to play, it just looks more like bad game design. The HUD is absolutely atrocious and just further proves my point, and you can beat this thing's arcade mode, which I think is the main mode, in about 30-ish minutes. This game takes place in Code Veronica and has you playing between Claire and Steve. And both of them have their own starting pistol, and throughout the levels there are pickups for some of their guns. Claire gets a rifle and magnum, Steve gets SMGs and a grenade launcher. There's also a time limit at the top of the screen. I don't know if you noticed it because, quite honestly, it seems a bit small, but when that time runs out, Nemesis shows up. A very random but also pretty awesome inclusion, essentially forcing you to stop slacking around and get shit done. However, it isn't until the 4th mission where I tend to see him in game, since even leisurely playing, I just don't really run out of time. At the end of each level, there is a boss fight too, and they are pretty fun if there isn't much to them, but they do get progressively harder as the game progresses, so it works out. As an arcade game, this is probably pretty good and could get ranked higher, but as a console game, however, I just didn't find it all that fun playing through. It's hard for me to rank this one though, because I don't think it's a C tier worthy game in this state at least, but there's still stuff to like as well that I don't know if I should, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to put the game in D tier. Moving on. So I'm very disappointed with this one, not only because I don't have a whole lot to say about this game, but because the game just straight up stopped working. Resident Evil Gaiden, which released for the Game Boy Color on December 14th, at least the PAL version did. The NA release didn't hit shelves till June 4th of 2002. Unfortunately, I do not own a copy of this game either, so I had to resort to old reliable emulation for the 4th time now. And this game just proceeded to break very quickly. I mean, from what I did play, it's very hard to judge, especially on a tier list amongst not just some of the greatest games ever made, but just games made on a piece of hardware capable of rendering 3D models. I will compliment this game for its sprites though. I think they're some of the best that I've seen on a Game Boy game. Granted, most of my experience with the Game Boy games was stuff like Pokemon and Crash Bandicoot Purple. The general gameplay has you traversing this ship, at least that's what I think. Again, I wasn't able to beat the game because it fucking broke on me. But when you run into zombies, you get into this first-person minigame looking screen, where in order to damage zombies, you have to time this square right. If you get it in the wider zone, it hits them about anywhere, but if you hit directly in the middle, it rewards you with a headshot. However, this is a Resident Evil game, a series known for item management. And this game, from what I've played, was pretty brutal in that regard. I was really struggling for ammo, but you can run away from zombies when you press the start button. However, the zombies begin to hit harder. And it's really difficult to actually run away anyways, as it requires perfect timing on the center of the bar. But even when I do manage to pull it off, I end up always leaving the encounter taking damage anyway. The audio and music does get grating after a bit, but I kinda expected that given it was a Game Boy game and the audio quality usually isn't great. But some of the sound effects are funny, like when the death sound effect just started repeating after I ran from a zombie. I'm not really sure what caused that, but that's hilarious. It might not be fair to rank this one since it's one of the few I didn't get to beat. I didn't get to finish this game at all, but I really wasn't feeling this one, so I don't really care that I didn't get to finish this one. I'm really sorry to all the Resident Evil Gaiden fans out there, all 4 of you. I think I'm going to place this game somewhere in D tier. It's not the worst thing I've experienced, but the game breaking, preventing me from actually playing it, did the game no favors at all. Moving on.
Resident Evil.
Released back on March 22nd of 2002, Resident Evil. I think this is one of the best remakes to ever be made, and even just one of the best games ever made too at that. It's kind of funny that this game came out only 6 years after the original, but with that in mind, you would think it was a lazy cash grab, but instead, it's a masterfully crafted cash grab. I think what makes it even better is Shinji Mikami coming back on to direct this project because he thought the original just wasn't aging as well, and that making it on a newer hardware could make the original vision come to fruition. And because of that, it is nearly the same game as the original, but with some pretty big additions and changes. But let's start with the graphics, since that was one of the biggest things about this game. It's gorgeous. I mean, it's very dark quite often, but I love the visuals in this game. The Spencer Mansion has never looked better. I love the gothic look it has to it, and I think the art direction here and all throughout just feels so eerie, and the sound design in this game absolutely elevates that feeling. Honestly, the visuals paired with the sound design comes together to form a very anxiety-inducing experience. It's great. And while it was a game made in 2002 for the GameCube, so of course it's not going to sound as high quality as it would nowadays, it's still a very unsettling game and has probably some of my favorite sound design in the series. It always causes shivers to go up my spine when I go into a room and hear a very subtle noise from a zombie hiding in a corner of a room in which you can't see until it's likely too late or just barely gives you time to decide on how to go on about moving past the encounter. On the gameplay side of things, it is very similar. As I just mentioned, the original release had tank controls and that's all. However, the remaster that is currently available on everything offers both tank controls and an alternative option that makes juking enemies much easier and makes the game a lot more approachable to newer players, even if I do think it might break the game a little bit. But generally, the game does feel harder than the original, just overall. Feels like the game gives out less ammo throughout the experience. The zombies feel tankier, and they even swap around item placements too, if I'm not mistaken, which I appreciate for really differentiating the experiences even on just a base level. But then they decided to add the Crimson Heads, as if the game wasn't already difficult enough. A mechanic that doesn't feel nearly as utilized as you'd think it would because they are awesome. That moment where you encounter your first Crimson Head falling out of the hanging coffin still lives in my mind rent-free as one of the more memorable moments in a sea of iconic scenes in this game. It adds another level of depth to the general gameplay loop. You can prevent them from spawning when you kill a zombie and then burn the body, or blowing their shiz move off, though they did randomize the chances of being able to blow their heads off, making the mechanic really unreliable. Or you can run away and just not fight the zombie in the first place, however leaving you vulnerable in case you go back to that location and the zombie still being there, possibly being a roadblock later on. But it does a similar thing that Nemesis in the original RE3 did, where it felt like you never really knew when or where he was gonna show up. And while Nemesis was scripted, despite what others want you to believe, these guys here feel entirely random when they are gonna happen, and even if they weren't, you are still given that anxiety when walking by bodies of zombies, some of which that might not even have been ones you killed and might just be set dressing that you didn't realize were there in the first place. But you won't know until they make noises and get up, and it's absolutely terrifying when they do. There's obviously a lot that I'm gonna leave out here because I do want to do a full retrospective kind of video on this game because I absolutely adore this game. But what I want to talk at least a tiny bit about is Lisa Trevor. This subplot was originally intended for the original RE1 but never made the cut, and it wasn't until this remake that it could finally see the light of day. You can find notes regarding her backstory and how she became what she was and even became a recurring boss-like enemy. I've seen a few people online claim she's a stalker-like enemy, but I strongly disagree with that, solely due to the fact that the only similarities to that of Nemesis and Remake Mr. X is that you can down her temporarily but not kill her, but there is only 3 moments where you truly encounter her that stick out in my mind. There may be more, but I distinctly only remember 3. Besides that, I really like her design. Hell, I love all the designs of the enemies in the remake, but Lisa was absolutely terrifying to me. The noises she makes too were always unsettling to me for the longest time as well. So anytime I did enter a room and she was placed into it, it was just like, oh fuck. And the entire time I was just riddled with anxiety while playing. I do gotta talk about the story a little bit. Yeah, it's a Resident Evil game. Again, it does bring back the 2 different playable characters with Jill and Chris. However, both characters do retain the same advantages and disadvantages that they had in the original. And obviously, they also have the same characters as backup, with Jill having Barry and Chris having Rebecca. And story-wise, they both have different moments throughout the game as well. Of course, most notably, Jill Sandwich and not Jill Sandwich. However, the vibe and the tone of this game, just as a whole, is a lot different. Though the voice acting definitely feels very unserious still, with it just not being very great. The dialogue isn't amazing, but the dialogue definitely feels a lot, I guess, better and more serious and more in line with the tone than it did in the original. However, it's not great. We do get better voice acting later down the line in the series, however, but it definitely feels like an improvement, I guess. However, there's a lot of lines that just don't feel as funny, and that's one thing I think RE1, the original, will always live in my mind for just being funny. However, Resident Evil 1 Remake holds up surprisingly well, to a point that even the scares themselves hold up extremely well, making it one of the most terrifying experiences I've had ever. Which is really weird to say considering it's a Resident Evil game, but yeah, this game really keeps you on your toes. It's really good at being a horror game and just being scary. Nowadays, it doesn't get me as much, but still, the anxiety that you feel when playing this game is unmatched. Lastly, I want to talk about the music in this game because I think it's, to this day, some of the best you can find in the series. The save theme is probably one of my favorites in the entire series, alongside 0, 4, and 7 for me personally. Overall, I adore this game, and it's easily one of my favorites, definitely my top 3, and for that, I'm going to place this game into S tier. Moving on.
Resident Evil 0.
Released on November 12th of 2002 in North America, Resident Evil 0. I am conflicted about this game, because on one hand, there is quite a bit to like about it. The Ecliptic Express is cool as all hell, and one of the more unique locations we've seen in the series. Seriously, to this day, we haven't had anything that has come as interesting or as cool as it in my opinion, at least from a visual standpoint. Rebecca is here, and playable. That is at least 10 points. But I just did not find the game nearly as fun as the previous games, especially compared to RE1 Remake. Having the player control 2 characters is a neat concept to me though, one that also comes up later in the series, but here, it definitely does have an issue with it, but it's not nearly as bad as what you would think. That issue though is being the moment that you let the AI control the other character, because it's like watching their brain shut off in real time. Otherwise, I just didn't find much of an issue with this aspect. An issue I did have though is the item management, which is really funny because that is a core aspect of these games, and it's something that I praise the other games for. And yet this game decided to remove the item box. The item management alone makes this easily one of, if not the hardest mainline titles. It's extremely strict, especially when both characters only have 6 slots each, which in theory sounds like it should be easier, but in reality it's not. The game does add the ability to drop items, and they are even marked on the map and color-coded based on the kind of item it is too, whether it's a weapon or a healing item. And it requires a ton of item juggling between both characters. The shotguns in this game and the launcher both take 2 slots respectively, which is a really mean decision since it's not like that in Resident Evil 1 Remake, which released the same year. Some may prefer this, and I get it because it really does add a crushing level of difficulty in this aspect, but for me, it's just not really my thing and really makes the replays feel like a chore, especially when the hookshot is a key component to this game. I think I have more hate towards the Eliminators though. These guys just suck. The cutscene with with the cage opening up causes PTSD, and I remember why it always took me multiple days to finish this game, because, man, they are miserable. Especially when they throw 4 of these agile, aggressive white bastards at you. Though I will give the devs credit for one thing, and it's placing an eliminator right next to the typewriter when you go to find Rebecca. That is some funny shit, but it's also really evil. You also have sort of like a stalker enemy. It's Mimicry Marcus, who is these leeches that take on the form of this guy named Marcus, who's important to the story. And I think this guy's alright. Like, a lot of people acted like he was pretty annoying. I mean, I guess he is. He really is a difficult enemy to dispose of. But I don't know, as long as you have Molotov cocktails, which yes, you can craft Molotov cocktails. And it's really funny. It's one of my favorite things to make in this game, just to throw at people. I think the boss fights are mostly fine. I just think RE1 does them better across the board. But then, you have the fucking bat that I hate. Remove him. Visually, RE0 is pretty much the same as RE1 Remake, though I did find that the Spencer Mansion completely mogs the fuck out of every location in this game. But RE1 Remake doesn't have the funniest portrait to ever be put in the game, so if we were keeping score, it would be 1-1. It's neck and neck right now. Honestly, once you leave the train, the rest of the game just does not stand out much, especially put up next to RE1 Remake. And I don't mean just visually. Even in the level design department, it just feels like a lesser RE1 remake. Not the worst level design in the series, far from it. We haven't even gotten to what's considered bad in the series. But playing this right after 1 just feels like, that's it? The music is pretty good across the board as well, but the standout is the save theme here. It's not even close. A top 5er in the entire series. It has such a sad vibe to it, but it sounds so nice on the ears. It's beautiful. Have a listen. There isn't a whole lot that I took away from my replay of this game. I was pretty negative for most of this segment, but don't get it twisted. I still think this is a good game. And I can sorta see why people have it ranked so highly, but personally, I just don't have it high up. I'm placing Resident Evil 0 in B tier. Moving on. I didn't think I'd have to do this, but I'm giving everyone watching right now an epilepsy warning for this segment because this game will straight up blind you. Honestly, skip past this segment if you need to because, oh my god. Resident Evil Dead Aim released back on February 13th of 2003 in Japan and June 17th of that same year in North America. I hope you enjoyed the break from light gun shooters because we have yet another one. Dead Aim is considered the 4th and final installment in what was once called the Gun Survivor series. Now you may be asking, when the hell was there a 3rd game? So yeah, they just made one of these but for Dino Crisis and then put it a part of this mini-series. I have no intentions to play it, and right now I am exhausted of these kinds of games. So Dead Aim tries to shake it up a little bit. You move around in 3rd person as if it was any other Resi game, but when you go to shoot enemies is when it transitions into 1st person. I think control-wise, this is the best feeling of the 3 yet. Still feels a little jank at times, however this game also does something else that is different than the last one. Something you wouldn't expect from a Resident Evil game. It takes place on a boat. Yeah, I know, it's crazy stuff. Visually, I'd say the environments are good, a huge step up from the previous 2 Survivor games at the very least. The game also does its best to actually try and have a horror feel to it, and it did a pretty good job at achieving that, which was the most surprising thing to me. Honestly, it might end up going down as one of the more underrated RE games when it comes to its atmosphere. There isn't much music to be heard at all, really, usually just your footsteps and other noises from the location you are in. Dead Aim also tries to blend classic Resident Evil mechanics into the light gun genre, more so than the Survivor games did. Ammo is limited on all weapons across the board. No longer do you have an infinite ammo pistol. Instead, if you run out, you have to search for ammo in different rooms. You are also limited to only being allowed to hold 6 stacks of ammo. I'd say it adds a neat bit of difficulty and tension to this light gun shooter, but to me it felt more like an inconvenience than anything else. Every save room gives you like 6 stacks of of pistol ammo, so you are never truly running out, but that's not really something new to the series. Even classic Resident Evil did it at some points. But then you have the other guns in your inventory that you just will not be able to hold ammo for because of the limit. More often than not, it doesn't end up mattering anyways because they don't give you a lot of ammo for those guns. For the enemies themselves, there's a lacking variety, but also, more importantly, they just don't die. They are some of the tankiest enemies I think I've fought in these games so far. They will go down for maybe a second at most, then get back up. It'll take what feels like 2 or 3 mags to actually put an enemy down. A good indicator on if you actually killed them, at least to me, is when they fly back, kind of like when you headshot the Ganados. But even then, I can't even confirm if this is reliable, so take that for what you will. And the game will quite often throw you into rooms with 10 or more enemies in them. However, this game does allow for the option for you to just avoid any and all conflicts. Almost all of them can be done completely unscathed too. I have no idea if this is intentional because it feels almost too easy to pull that off, and I've ended up just resorting to doing that instead of actually engaging in the game's combat. In all honesty, I don't find the game all that fun. It's much better than the last two, no doubt, but I just don't think these games are for me. But you can't deny that they definitely improved upon whatever formula they were using for these games, because this one definitely feels like a competent game compared to the other two. But the game is, once again, 2 hours long. A lot of enemy encounters still feel irritating to play, skill issue or not. Level design is still extremely linear, and the story, you got what's clearly a dude putting on a fake southern accent that he can't keep up the whole time, and his name is Bruce McGivern. I don't like him. Morpheus D. Duval, however, he's cool, I guess. He's the main villain of this game. Not sure what they meant by making him a woman when he takes the T-Virus. One thing I didn't expect from this game was being blinded. When trying to fight enemies, you also play as this lady named Fong Ling, and she has a machine gun that you will hardly ever find ammo for, but it holds a 100-round drum mag. And yeah, this thing is capable of permanently scarring your eyes. This is just bad. Like, you couldn't have toned this down a little bit. It looks like I'm playing Counter-Strike the way the screen keeps getting flashbanged. This is horrible. The save music's really good. That's all. That's the last thing I wanted to say. That's all I have to say. I am placing this game into C tier. It does more than the other Survivor games do, but I would still rather be playing anything else. Moving on.
Resident Evil.
Released on March 30th of 2004, Resident Evil Outbreak. Finally! A spin-off that isn't a light gun shooter. I can't believe it. Resident Evil Outbreak is a co-op survival horror spin-off, and I think conceptually, this is the best spin-off. Well, besides Code Veronica and Revelations, I suppose, but those feel more like mainline titles. You could play Outbreak in either single-player or online multiplayer. Unfortunately, I only got to experience some of this game in single-player, and it didn't go that great. The game gives you AI teammates in single-player that feel like they don't really do anything of value. Sometimes they will just outright disappear, never to be seen again, only for you to run into them later on in an area you had to unlock, and it makes you question how did they get there, and then you look at their inventory and it's like, wait a minute, how did you find 2 shotguns? The AI teammates overall just don't really feel all that smart. They do act differently a little bit, at least that's what I read online. I didn't notice it. All I know is that they don't give items. Like, you could request an item, and sometimes they just straight up refuse, so you have to give them an item if their inventory is full just to get that item. You can choose between 5 different scenarios, the difficulty of said scenario, and between 8 different characters. Some have their own starting gun. Alyssa Ashcroft makes her debut as a character here. You probably know her from Resident Evil Requiem, but she is considered a master of unlocking, so she gets a lockpick that is actually very helpful. She can open up rooms and doors and whatnot that would never be unlocked otherwise. Then you got someone like Mark, who can like shove enemies around, or Jim, who enemies don't attack as often. Then of course, one of the cooler aspects is the T-Virus infection that each player has. You can use items to halt its progress, however taking damage and whatnot can speed it up, and if you get downed, it will also rapidly increase as well. If the meter hits 100% and you're still downed, you end up becoming a zombie. Now, if you're playing in multiplayer, you can just go around and kill your friends, which sounds really fun, but it puts you on a time limit to finish the scenario. Said time limit, from what I've experienced, is pretty generous, all things considered, but the idea in itself is pretty cool, though it does kind of reek of that artificial difficulty meant to make the game harder than it actually is. This game also adds in a bunch of different melee weapons you can find. And they are all pretty funny. It's really fun to go around and just beat the shit out of enemies with either a metal pipe or a broomstick. It's really fun. One of my favorite additions in this game, and I honestly wish to see this happen in more games. I want to be able to use a broom more often. Come on, Capcom. Let me use the broom. Story-wise, the game's very light on story. There's almost nothing there for you. There's like an opening and ending cutscene to each mission, or each scenario, I should say, and that's about it. The scenarios themselves aren't very well connected at all, but you do have your notes and files around those scenarios that you can find, and they give you a little bit of lore, so there is something for you there. But I also do like the concept of the game. You're playing as a bunch of different civilians and whatnot during the Outbreak in Raccoon City that takes place during Resident Evil 2 and 3, and you're just trying to escape. And I think that's great. I think that's cool. I think the level design could use a bit of work, but what we get here is decent. It's also pretty well varied as well, with the 5 different scenarios all feeling unique from one another. You have one that starts off in a bar and you're in the city streets. You have the one in the hospital, which takes place in the hospital that you see in Resident Evil 3, which is pretty cool. Or the lab that you go to in Resident Evil 2. These two specifically are expanded locations, so they're just like what you saw in those last two games. But my personal favorite, it's the Hellfire scenario. I think that one is the best one. It's my favorite one. But also, I think it's just the most well-designed. I like that some areas are cut off by fire, and then there's also quite a bit of backtracking in this one too. Instead of having voice chat, this game has the ad-lib system, where moving around the joystick can make your character shout a voice line, and it communicates to teammates, depending on what it is you're shouting at them. This is great, especially when you didn't have voice chat built into the PlayStation 2, so to make a workaround for that so you could communicate online, this was a good alternative, I think. Of course, this gets really annoying in single player after a while when characters start randomly shouting for no reason, and the AI don't seem to be programmed to actually listen to you. However, this can also lead to some really funny moments.
My life is shit!
Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot for me to say about this game because I wasn't able to get the true experience.
What?
But what I did experience, I found really cool. I liked it quite a bit, and so for that, I'm placing Resident Evil Outbreak into B tier. Moving on.
Outbreak. File 2.
Released onto store shelves on April 26th of 2005 in North America, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, and it pretty much just is Resident Evil Outbreak, but 2. It retains the same characters you loved from the first game, design and all, same items and stuff like that, looks exactly the same, so of course, there might be less to say overall. This game has an actual tutorial utilizing the opening scenario from File 1, which is fine as far as tutorials go. I've definitely seen worse. I don't feel like praising it though. File 2 does add in new scenarios, however, and I think they are all pretty solid, but my personal favorites were the zoo scenario and the RPD. The zoo was a pretty huge area that you had to progress through to escape, and just like the Hellfire scenario in File 1, it felt like the absolute closest to the classic RE formula, but perfected in a co-op setting. And the setting of this scenario most definitely being one of my favorites. It's a similar thing for a game like Manhunt for me, which also looked pretty neat in that game as well. This scenario also had an infected elephant that is kind of a stalker enemy, kind of not. I don't want to make the claim that he is like unscripted or anything, but there are times where he just simply exists and then doesn't. It's hard to predict what he's doing. There's even a tiger as well, and these two, when they do work as actual enemies, increase the tension in this scenario tenfold in my opinion. You're already worrying about the zombies and other regular enemies and the virus meter, your partners being morons, but you also have to worry about a big cat and an elephant that can crush you if you get careless. Things like this are what make the Outbreak games so cool to me. The scenario in the RPD is also really neat to me. We get to see the remains of the police force holding down inside the station, and you get to explore this remade version of RE2's original RPD. The gas wasn't needed though, I will stand by that. That was a horrible decision. Mechanically speaking, there is some big changes here. You can move while shooting, which for some reason I couldn't get to work. The tutorial showcases how it works, and I think I was just suffering from a skill issue, but I've seen people do it. I know it's a mechanic. You can pick up items while crawling as well, and heal while downed. And characters also come with starting items that can also be given to other players, like Yoko specifically having the Lucky Charm, which can slow down your virus meter, which is a huge game changer if you have someone that plays a character with a higher infection rate. And speaking of the virus meter, it is way slower in this game than it was in the first one, which is also pretty great. I feel like that would be one of the more controversial additions to the first game, because it adds in artificial difficulty and puts you on a time crunch. Even though I really like the mechanic, at least story-wise and conceptually, I thought it was really cool. But it is a nice change to slow it down, to make it easier for newcomers, and to make it a much more approachable game. Visually speaking, outside of the different scenarios, yeah, it's the exact same game. If it released these days, everyone would scream that it's a glorified DLC. And honestly, you could still argue that it was even back then. But they do one real drastic change. The characters actually shut up. Yeah, they don't really shout voice lines endlessly anymore unless prompted to by the ad-lib system, which is good on my ears and on my sanity, but it also got rid of any moments of them barging into a room I was in. Overall, I do like File 2, but just about as much as I like File 1. I think it plays better than File 1 by quite a bit. It's a really good improvement over the first game, but I think both Outbreak games are pretty great as concepts, but playing them solo with AI partners definitely sours the experiences, and I think every attempt at co-op in Resident Evil has kind of always had that issue, where if you try to play it with AI partners, it's just not that good. But for Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, I will be placing it into B tier. Moving on.
Resident Evil 4.
Released on January 11th of 2005 initially as a GameCube exclusive before spreading its disease into every single existing platform, corrupting the youth, Resident Evil 4. This game is everything the average person probably loves about Resident Evil while also being the mother of everything wrong with Resident Evil. And for that, this game goes to the top of S tier. This ranking comes from both a place of nostalgia, since I grew up playing this game on the Wii as a small child, while also giving this game another shot in the modern day and seeing how brilliant the game is mechanically. Story-wise, I mean, the game is Resident Evil. It's campy, probably one of my personal favorites in the series, but I wouldn't exactly call it good. The characters, however, are what make it appear as good though. Leon became instantly one of my favorite characters, just because of how entertaining he is, despite how far detached he is from his RE2 version. But he had this weird charm and whimsy to his character whenever he made quips.
Women.
The villains, though, some of my favorites in the entire series besides, like, you know, obviously Wesker's a #1 if you're a Resident Evil fan. Most people love him. But this game also has some pretty heavy hitters. Osmond Saddler probably has my favorite line in the entire game.
The American prevailing is a cliche that only happens in your Hollywood movies. Oh, Mr. Kennedy, you entertain me.
But Salazar probably is the more iconic of the main villains of this game, and it's for good reason. It's because he's entertaining. However, even Krauser is pretty cool, but it's kind of funny that at the same time, this guy just kind of popped into existence, and Leon knows who he is, but you're kind of just left there like, who the fuck are you? I do want to say, though, about the story at least, is that the opening might be the funniest thing to my irony-poisoned brain. The first 3 mainline games basically ended like, yeah, fuck Umbrella, we're gonna take them down. All for RE4 to open up like, yeah man, their stock prices hit rock bottom, and they were #canceled. I'm Leon Kennedy. He really said that. I was there. The thing I adore about this game the most, though, is the gameplay. I think out of all the classic RE games, it's easily my favorite to go back to and replay, even with the tank controls. The gunplay is tight, and it feels immaculate for the time it released, and ages pretty well today, even with its crusty-ass audio. The gameplay as a whole comes together to form one of my favorite combat systems in not just a Resident Evil game, but in action games as a whole. The introduction of melee combat here as button prompts when staggering enemies, which not only can be used to remove a guy from the plane of existence, but also can be used for tactical reasons like making space for yourself and repositioning when you get swarmed. It's so cool. Of course, this game also introduces my favorite character, the Merchant. He can sell you firearms and upgrades to improve your arsenal and other things, and you can sell him treasures. He's a really fun character, even if he doesn't service the story like at all. Did you know that Paul Mercier, the voice of Leon, also voices the Merchant? So basically he's just talking to himself the entire game. I gotta say, despite how much more open the level design is in this game with the village and the castle, I think it works really well. You still have a little bit of that interconnectivity with the village and how it makes you backtrack. Even if at points it gets a bit more linear, I still find it engaging to run around in and exploring. Visually, the game is still gorgeous in its own drab way. I really like the gritty gothic aesthetic you see in parts of the village and mostly in the castle. However, there is one part of the game I do not like. I don't hate it as much as other people do. I think it's mostly okay, but I agree with the popular consensus that it's the weakest part of the game, the island. Visually, I find it less interesting and appealing overall. The enemy design, with one exception, feels a lot less intriguing gameplay-wise and more infuriating with the armored Ganados, and the game just kind of feels like it's dragging itself across the finish line at certain points. But if there was one redeeming quality, it's when you discover the Regenerators. I think out of all the enemies, these guys and the Garradors are probably my favorite for how unique they are design-wise, with the Garradors operating off of sound instead of vision. Even if they don't work perfectly, like I swear they can see, they absolutely can, but sometimes they like to pretend. But the Regenerators are perfect, no notes. Having the different parasites that you need to destroy in order to effectively kill them, because without destroying them, they will, as the name suggests, their body will regenerate. Having a thermal scope kind of makes them into a joke, but the first encounters with them until then are terrifying. One of the few horror moments in this game, and it's done so well in my opinion. This game is heavy with the boss fights too, and I think they are definitely a mixed bag, which is pretty much how I feel about most RE games, but I liked Krauser's, at least when he mutates. The knife QTE fight, that one was, I could go without that one. I didn't care for that one, but I think when he mutates, that fight is pretty cool. I thought Salazar's fight was okay. I didn't think it was that great. It was rather easy. Sadler's was deeply disappointing and easy, though. He just has a big eye that you shoot, and then you get a rocket launcher, and boom, it's over. It's not that great of a boss fight. Mendez's was pretty cool. The Gigante and Del Lago fights are iconic, but the most iconic one to me, my favorite one, absolutely, is the Verdugo. I love the Verdugo fight. I think he's awesome. He has a ton of aura. He walks in, aura farms, gets his ass beat immediately. I like that you do have to kind of freeze him in order to like slow him down and be able to damage him. While it can be annoying for some players, I think it definitely adds a bit more of tension because you have to find an opportunity to stop him and be able to take him down. Rocket launcher. But yeah, I definitely find them to just be whatever overall, mostly because I just prefer the general combat with regular enemies over the boss fights. Now, I know I've been giving this game a lot of time in the spotlight, but I have at least 2 last things to talk about, and then we can move on. Ashley. Growing up, I remember everyone hating her, saying she dragged the game down. She made it needlessly hard, and that kind of rubbed off onto me because I remember not liking her as much either. But every version of this game that I have replayed, she wasn't nearly as bad as I remembered. She would duck and avoid your shots if you aimed in her direction, and while, yeah, they did give her a slightly annoying voice, she's Sandy Cheeks after all, but even when she gets grabbed, you usually have more than enough time to save her. I guess the only real challenge about her is managing her health bar, but again, I didn't have much issue with it personally. Then you have the mercenaries in this game, which is just fantastic. A high score based mode allowing you to run around as Wesker and Krauser. Much more of an arcadey shooting range where you rack up points under a time limit. Much different from what we saw in RE3, and while I actually liked RE3's mercenaries mode, I much prefer this one. But I will say one last thing. I want to take a brief second to talk about the soundtracks too for this game. It is really damn good. So many iconic tracks. The Drive, Serenity, the Save theme, the music during Salazar's boss fight. There is some more forgettable tracks, yeah, but the ones that go hard, go hard. But my personal favorite of the entire soundtrack is titled The Another End. I have never heard this in-game, ever. I have no idea why, but I discovered it on Spotify one day when I was bored looking for Resi soundtracks to listen to, and it might just end up being one of my most played songs of the whole year. Right next to Freddie Gibbs, it's a Resident Evil 4 reunion up in here. And if you were wondering about separate ways for any reason, I don't know, it was fine, I guess. I didn't find it to add literally anything to the game, story-wise or gameplay-wise. It felt almost identical despite, like, having the black tail, like, off rip. But I did like the skill check at the very end with Sadler because I find that boss fight to be a lot harder than not just his fight in the main game, but just harder than anything the DLC throws at you. Like, even the boat section wasn't even that hard. It was just infuriating. C tier. Moving on.
Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles.
Initially released on November 13th of 2007 in North America, and for some reason found its way onto the PSN in June of 2012, Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles. This was one of the few original titles made for the Nintendo Wii way back when. There was only one other one, and the rest were just ports of others, and a really good port of RE4 for some reason. Umbrella Chronicles is an on-rails light gun shooter, and we all know I'm not very fond of those for Resident Evil, but this time I did something different for it. I dragged someone else along for the ride. Friend of the channel Tactics Zombies volunteered to play these games with me, and I think that was the best way to experience this game in my opinion.
Yes! The portrait! It's there!
Umbrella Chronicles is essentially a retelling of games from the past, those being RE0, 1 Remake, and 3. The game contains 4 distinct scenarios, 3 of which being retellings of the games I had just mentioned, and an original, which takes place in a Russian Umbrella facility. For the retellings, these are kind of like abridged versions of the original games, with certain different scenes and different dialogue, and most definitely different voice acting. For some reason, Roger Craig Smith shows up to voice Billy a couple of times during the RE0 scenario, but it's never consistent. They change voice actors, like Roger just shows up like a handful of times for some reason. If I had to guess, it's probably because they were in the middle of working on RE5, so they said, fuck it, let's get Roger in the booth for this one.
You're the escaped prisoner, Billy Cohen.
Can we put a hold on the whole arresting me thing? We have bigger things to worry about right now.
Adequate burgers today.
The game feels a lot like House of the Dead, but I probably only think that because it has zombies and it's like the only other on-rail shooter I've played. But you can do basic light gun things. Shoot your gun, wait for the game to let you move into a room, or my favorite activity, forever swinging the Wiimote to use the knife.
He's talking like Silver the Hedgehog.
It's no use!
Yeah, don't even waste your ammo. Just hold Z and then you can like...
Z?
This button up and unshot.
Yeah!
This is gaming right here.
This is peak gaming. You know what? Let's just use a knife for the rest of the game.
No.
You do have your arsenal of weapons, which is quite large, with having like 3 options for every type of weapon, but you can only go into each scenario with 1. And you can upgrade weapons to be more effective for you, and you know, that's all great. One thing I do like about Umbrella Chronicles is that there's multiple pathways. I thought it was just when the tutorial said you could shoot doors to find secret areas, but no, you can choose between different pathways to take, which I find adds quite a bit of replayability and making you want to redo a scenario just to see what the other areas had that you didn't visit. There's also quick time events, which are meh, though I do think it's kind of funny to be able to pull off counterattacks, which tend to be pretty over the top. When it comes to the iconic herbs of Resident Evil, you just immediately heal when you pick them up, and then first aid sprays, which are essentially your retries whenever you die. So there's that.
How did Spencer pull and fumble Miranda?
It should have been me, not him.
Can I just say though, the best part of this game was not the fun I had playing with a friend. Hell, it barely had anything to do with the gameplay itself, but instead it was the music. Seriously, there was just too many bangers here to mention, so here, take a snippet of one of my favorites. I am a bit conflicted here because I don't think it's anywhere close to a bad game, but I didn't find it too fun. Like, there was a little fun to be had, but this is mostly what I'm basing my ranking off of, and I think it could float between C and B tier, but if you are playing with someone else, then it will absolutely be somewhat of a fun time at least. Moving on.
Resident Evil 5.
Initially released on March 5th of 2009 for the Xbox 360 and PS3, Resident Evil 5. The racist one. I think if I only replayed this game in solo for this video, I would have ranked it in C tier in all honesty. Now wait. Before you type that comment, let me cook for a second. Come on, I got some ideas here. Let me cook. This is like the Resident Evil equivalent of Need for Speed Pro Street for me, just without the questionable depictions of individuals and many ass shots of Sheva Alomar. They're the exact same game. I don't know what you want me to say. I didn't really like this game much growing up. I mean, I didn't hate it either. Many lauded it as the worst Resident Evil game at one point, or one of them at least. And I guess if you're talking strictly mainline titles as of 2009, maybe it was. It definitely felt a lot weaker coming off of RE4 in certain areas, but playing it in co-op as it was intentionally designed for definitely elevates the experience. And it makes sense too. You got two characters on the box art, not one. What? Do you lack friends or something? Story-wise, I'll be honest, I was not paying attention to anything outside of cracking jokes at Wesker and saying 7 minutes. And the fact that it took me and my friend nearly 45 minutes trying to figure out the Jill boss fight like Patrick with the plank in his head. It was not that hard in hindsight. We were just stupid. I like Chris, I like Sheva, and I adore Wesker. Jill kinda really just serves more for Chris's thing in this game rather than being an actual character, though I did think the reveal was kinda cool, even if extremely predictable. My friend who never played this game before immediately clocked it the moment she was on screen for the first time, but even then, I thought it was a decent reveal. I thought what they were going for was alright. However, I could care less about the rest of the cast here. Irving, Excella, I don't care. They're not bad. I kind of like them to an extent, but I don't know. They don't leave much of an impact on me. It feels more or less like just a Michael Bay action movie, which isn't a bad thing by any means, but when playing in co-op, I just don't find the story interesting or entertaining enough to pay attention. Not that that's a bad thing. Resident Evil games and movies don't really have the greatest stories, but that's just how I feel about the story. But on the gameplay side of things, it's solid. It feels a lot similar to RE4 with some slight differences, like having a different feeling to the tank controls when it comes to movement, but still retaining the stop and aim gunplay that the previous games had. Now, I've played this game on the Switch, PC, and Xbox, and one thing I noticed about the PC version, which was weird, was the removal of the laser sight and replacing it with a cheap looking reticle. Such a weird change in my opinion when RE4 still has the laser and all the reticle does is make the game easier. I guess if this is to provide a more precise aim for the PC players, I guess, but I would have liked an option and not have to resort to getting a mod for something so simple. The enemy design is a lot similar to RE4 as well. By that I mean they resort to the Las Plagas. Honestly, I could just call this a worse RE4 with co-op. Not that that's a bad thing, though I guess calling something worse than something else does have a negative connotation to it, but they straight up rip some enemies from RE4, like the Gigante, the Soldier Ganados, the Chainsaw Guy. Listen, I remember reading the files regarding the Las Plagas, so I can get behind a lot of this, right? And I can let a lot of it slide. But I don't think the Las Plagas told this dude to grab a chainsaw. I'm sorry, they just wanted to do that just to do it. The only two enemies I didn't enjoy fighting were the Reapers and the big dudes with the Gatling guns. The dudes with the Gatling guns are more so just a nuisance, but the Reapers feel almost unkillable at times. Like, me and my friend will just be mag dumping their weak spots and nothing happens. They just keep getting back up. I don't understand. Other times, my friend will 2-tap them with the stun rod. And then they have a one-shot move which is meant to punish you if you let them get too close, which I think is fine, even if it feels like it's not always telegraphed properly and does kind of toe the line of just being bullshit. I don't know, I don't mind this part of it, but I do wish they were, like, I don't know, I guess more consistent with how they can die, if that makes sense, because there's just too many times where we are just endlessly shooting them and their weak spots aren't like doing anything. Enemies overall just feel a lot tankier than they did in RE4 as well. I don't really get why. Maybe it's because it's co-op, maybe it's easier in solo. I didn't notice the differences, but I mean, the game just kind of hoes you on money for upgrades and the sell prices are abysmal, so to make some regular ass Majani go down in like 3 or more shotgun shells at close range is certainly a choice. But then there's the boss fights. Oh man, the boss fights. I say that like I care about them. There's only a couple I downright dislike, and the rest I think are fine. I don't really like the Nadesu. I felt like it was one of those Terminator arcade game fights that you'd deal with in like a Chuck E. Cheese. The Ouroboros fight, which is infamous because I'm pretty sure modern versions of the game broke it because of the increased frame rate. And then other than that, I didn't mind them at all. I thought some of them were quite fun. I don't mind Albert Wesker's fight. I thought it was cool, mostly for the sake of spectacle, but you know, nothing to complain about there. The QTEs, I might have forgotten to mention most of them with 4, but I didn't really like most of them outside of the button prompts during combat. It's mostly the same thing here as it was in 4. I swear sometimes they will flash the prompt for a 1/10 of a second and then you immediately die. It's kind of absurd. However, the best aspect of RE5 is not the base game like most games. No. It's the mercenaries. I actually adore this mode. I think it's one of the best iterations of this mode to this day. There is way more maps, more characters, and loadouts, even if a lot of them are just alternate costumes. You can play as Rebecca, you can play as Barry. Also, weirdly, I find the enemies to be less tanky, so it makes a great turn your brain off kind of mode to run for a quick hour or two. While I have been mostly critical for this segment, I think I'm going to place RE5 comfortably in A tier. Maybe not the top of A tier, as I think there is some stronger entries to come, but I think this was a great co-op experience with a great mercenaries. Moving on. RE5 would eventually get DLC sometime after release with Lost in Nightmares and Desperate Escape, neither taking very long to complete, with it taking me about 45-ish minutes to beat Lost in Nightmares on normal difficulty and 30 minutes to complete Desperate Escape. If you were to ask which one I prefer, it's gotta be Lost in Nightmare, without a doubt. Even if it's a bit fan servicey, I think if you compare the two, the gameplay for Lost in Nightmares is just more enjoyable and unique to RE5 as a whole, in my opinion. It takes place in the Spencer Mansion, having you play as Jill and Chris back in 2006. And this is basically that flashback you saw in the main game with Jill tackling Wesker out the window. So right from the jump, you already know how this DLC is going to end. They give you a pistol to start off with, and you can even find a shotgun, but to be honest, there isn't many enemies to fight for this to matter, and you do lose them at a certain point anyways. This DLC definitely tries to be more horror focused with its atmosphere and visuals, and while I wasn't completely sold on it, I actually found it to be a nice change of pace and wished this scenario was longer. Because of how short this DLC was, there was really only 2 standout moments in it because of how short it was, but they introduced this weird looking guy, and after some time you lose your weapons, as I mentioned, and you have to find these cranks, and you or your partner have to set up a trap, and the other person has to lure each and every single one of them under it and drop it on their head and kill them to get a piece to open this gate. I actually really liked this part of the DLC. I find it to be one of the more intense moments, not just in the DLC, but in the base game too even if the enemy AI wasn't always great. And I kinda like that you are just defenseless outside of your knife and being able to find flashbangs. Then there is the Wesker fight that the DLC ends off with, which kinda goes down similarly to the one in the main game when you first meet him, and he's like 7 minutes. It just feels less irritating in my opinion though, because it doesn't have Jill spraying you down. Desperate Escape, however, has you playing as Blonde, Jill, and Josh, and it goes down pretty much like how missions in the main game went down. High octane, action-packed, shooting gallery for the next 30 minutes, and I think it's fine. It's inoffensive. It doesn't do anything that pisses me off. It's kind of like RE5 Separate Ways in a sense, because it takes place right after Chris leaves Jill in the main game, and you just kind of see how she escapes. It ends with a horde on the roof that you gotta hold out for, and it lasts quite a bit, even when you think the timer's almost up and then it gets pushed back. Overall, this one's just fine. It didn't really do much for me, but I like Lost and Nightmares enough that I'm going to rank them together and place them both into B tier. Moving on.
Resident Evil, The Dark Side Chronicles.
Released on November 17th of 2009 in North America, and would also find its way onto PSN in June of 2012, just like Umbrella Chronicles, and is yet another on-rails light gun shooter. And the last one, too. Resident Evil Dark Side Chronicles. For this game, I once again dragged Tactic Zombies into playing it. Don't worry though, I got rid of them afterwards.
BSAC, like, that's a Resident Evil reference.
What is that a reference to?
The BSAC, like, Chris.
But shockingly, I found myself loving this game a lot more than Umbrella Chronicles. The presentation of this game feels like such a huge step up in comparison, though it definitely felt tonally different anyway, with Umbrella Chronicles feeling more arcadey, with Darkside going for a more cinematic tone, which also comes at the cost of very shaky camera shots. At least we know where the Modern Warfare reboot got its inspiration from. There's a lot of little things I noticed about this game, some not being as important to me, like seeing our character reload the gun we are using, to more important gameplay elements like in co-op having the health bars being separate, or instead of immediately healing upon picking up herbs, we actually get the choice to use them whenever we want, which I think on that aspect I definitely prefer this game for over Umbrella Chronicles, just because it really feels like you get put into a situation where you almost wasted herbs in Umbrella, but here you can stack up a couple and use them during boss fights and whatnot. Darkside Chronicles is once again more retellings of previous games, with those being RE2 and Code Veronica this time around, but I'd say this game also gives us a pretty important scenario for those that liked RE4, with letting us play Operation Avier with Leon and Krauser, which was the one thing that got me interested in playing this game. And when it comes to RE2 and CV, it definitely feels like it's taking its liberties with the story, because the tone of RE2 feels so different in comparison, but I find that to be the charm of this game. It feels more like an alternate universe in a way, and it leads to some of the most entertaining dialogue in the series at certain points, especially in RE2 with Leon and Claire.
Ugh, men. You just want to impress her, don't you?
Women.
Though that does technically mean that there is one less scenario in this game than in Umbrella Chronicles. But I honestly think that the scenarios here are a lot better than the ones in Umbrella. Especially because the ones in Umbrella just feel like reused assets and just putting you through an abridged version of the original games, while these ones feel mostly original and kind of like redone versions of events of these stories. The only scenario this didn't really apply to in Umbrella Chronicles was RE3, but that's because RE3 looked like this. But tonally, it just feels so different. Maybe it's because they got Paul Mercier to voice Leon again, who was also in 4, but it feels like it's going more for the tone of RE4, which I think is fine for this game, though the game does try to go for a more horror-like atmosphere compared to the arcadey feeling of Umbrella Chronicles, and I think for the most part it works out for the game. Visually, I think this game is a huge step up from Umbrella Chronicles. It has its moments where it looks slightly off, but the cutscenes in this game especially look great. Looks very similar to Degeneration, which also released the year prior. Subscribe and maybe I'll do a movie ranking next. The music in this game is also pretty good, but I'd probably give the edge to Umbrella here just because I prefer the arcadey sound of that soundtrack, though I do also love the redone versions of classic tracks from RE2. This is another one that I definitely recommend playing with a friend, but also I just think it's an overall improved game, though good luck finding a copy. I originally was never gonna get this because it was being sold at a local store for $80, and I reluctantly bought it to play with friends, and seeing that $80 is what it goes for on a good day is really sad and makes me kind of despise the used game market, but I had a great time with this game. It's probably my favorite spin-off in the series, so for that, I'm gonna place this game into A tier. Moving on.
Resident Evil, The Mercenaries 3D.
Released on June 2nd of 2011, at least over in Japan, and June 28th in North America, Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D. I remember hearing mixed things about this game and went to check the review scores and saw the same story. Mostly middling scores, which was funny because I had a bit of a blast playing this, to be honest. Unfortunately, again, one of those titles that I had to emulate, but I still found the game quite enjoyable, even if the control scheme was abysmal, to say the least, but I think that's the fault of the emulator and not the fault of the game. As the name suggests, this is a Resident Evil game where the only thing to do is mercenaries. As a professional mercenaries enjoyer, and one that loved RE5s in particular, this game was right up my alley. This game pretty much is just RE5's mercenaries thrown onto the 3DS, same combat mechanics and all. There is 8 total characters here: Chris, Jill, and Hunk, who are unlocked by default, then Rebecca, Barry, Krauser, Wesker, and Claire for some weird ass reason, which I'm not complaining about because I think we still need to see more Claire, but this was not the game I was expecting to see her in. But those 5 I just listed can be unlocked by getting a B rank or higher on the final mission of each level, which there is 5 total, and they all have their own missions in each one. And then there's costumes that can be unlocked in a similar fashion, which sounds a lot easier to do than it actually is. But yeah, it's Mercenaries, takes place in RE4 and RE5 locations. I find it to be quite an impressive handheld game. Yeah, it looks worse than RE5 does on console, but I mean, come on, this game at least looks decent. What I was shocked to see was them actually implement boss fights, which I definitely struggled with, but I appreciate them trying to spice things up a bit. There really isn't much else to say about this game. There is no story. It really is just a game where all you do is mercenaries mode. The development portion of its Wikipedia page I do have to mention because it's literally just a paragraph detailing that Leon wasn't in the game at launch because he would be in Operation Raccoon City, because I'm sure that worked out well for them. But apparently the producer said that adding Leon as DLC wasn't out of the question. But would you like to know that this game never got DLC at all? So he just lied. The producer lied. Why would he do that? For one thing that I heard, though, that absolutely is a negative, is that apparently this game only had one save file and you couldn't delete it. That's weird if it's true. Why would you? Why? Despite me enjoying my time with the game, I'm not gonna pretend that all the mixed and negative reviews don't have some validity to them, especially around release. I mean, 3DS games back then sold for $40 full price, and this game, while it does have a lot to do, it probably doesn't have the amount of content to really justify its price on a handheld. So realistically, this game is probably a C tier, but I'm going to be unreasonable and place it into B tier because I found myself enjoying the game quite a bit. If it was ordered, it'd probably go to the very bottom of B tier. Moving on.
Revelations.
Released on February 7th of 2012 for the Nintendo 3DS, at least here in North America, and later on would get released on PC and pretty much every console, including the Wii U, Resident Evil Revelations. And after playing it, I gotta say, I don't really get the hype for this one. Which sucks because I should have been the #1 consumer for this game. It stars Jill and she gets most of the playtime in the main story. The game tries to return to a more horror-centric atmosphere, but when I finished the game, I didn't feel anything really. I think this game is good and it's probably the best thing to come out of Resident Evil in 2012 amongst the 3 whole new games that came out back then. Talk about oversaturation. But I think I find this game cooler as a 3DS game, and with it being taken off of the 3DS, it just kind of feels like a game if that makes sense. As a 3DS game exclusively, it's really impressive from a visual and mechanical standpoint. It definitely just translates okay-ish onto other platforms, but you know what my real issue with this game is? We get stuck on a boat. Again. I kid, but the Queen Zenobia is a pretty cool looking location. Amongst all the boats we see in this series, it's probably the best one. For the most part, it's just a regular cruise ship and all, but you do have some neat looking areas here. The Grand Hall, for example, is absolutely beautiful, very glowing, very yellow, very bright, and the music that plays in here completely sells it for me. I like the promenade, even if it's a very small area. I actually like how enemy encounters feel here. It's a very tight location, making the general combat, which is usually pretty easy, feel at least a little intense. Oh yeah, and how could I forget the casino? Visually, I mean, it's a casino. I'm gonna love it regardless. And you can hit the slots. But that's easily my favorite part about this game, the setting. Though you do find yourself in a snowy area that I think is in Europe, and a beach near the ruins of a once floating city named Terra Grigia, and even some flashback missions on that city, as it was infested with hunters. I do wish we got to see more of the snowy area, and I think even some more stuff pertaining to Terra Grigia could have been cool as well, because to me the whole thing surrounding it is probably the most interesting thing about this game, and it's also really absurd and feels pretty in line for the stupidity of Resident Evil stories. Yet we only get to see glimpses of it here and there and learn about it mostly in passing. But then again, in the Terra Grigia missions, you only fight hunters as a terrorist organization sent hunters out to destroy that city. So I think the music overall is actually way better than I remember it being. It's not touching the top 5, at least for me, maybe not even top 10, but there is some pretty good music here. Both actual music like what you hear in the lab, which gives a real spacey, futuristic vibe to it, but also some more atmospheric stuff that you'll hear on the Zenobia. But the most important aspect of any Resident Evil game, the part gamers hate actually analyzing, the gameplay. It's mostly fine. It ties back to what I said about it being on the 3DS. Now for this playthrough, I played it on PC and it felt quite floaty in comparison to pretty much every game I've played up until now. And while this isn't a complete deal breaker for me, it definitely made the combat feel less enjoyable than other titles in the series. Combat is some of the easiest I've experienced too. I played it on normal and even dabbled a little bit in the harder difficulties and ended the game with deaths in the single digits. Half of these came from the final boss fight. The enemy variety feels low. I may be wrong about that, but it at least feels that way, especially off of a first glance. But you have the ooze, which come in 4 different variations. A regular one that shoots from a distance, and one that has... I don't actually know. I feel like I'd never seen the pincers, at least not enough to know what niche they even fill, so they're just kind of there to be there. And lastly, you have the chunk ooze, which explode when you kill them. These guys are pretty neat. If you run into groups of enemies, they can be used to take out everyone, as if you were to throw a grenade at them. The game, as I mentioned, also has hunters, but in this game, they don't really have that same threat to them that they did in the past. If anything, they kind of just feel like a regular enemy that just happens to attack more frequently than the ooze. There is also hunters that can cloak, and these guys are great. They're stronger enemies in all aspects, and just generally some of the most difficult to deal with due to the cloak and how agile they are. I really do like these guys and wish a mechanic like this would make its return in some capacity in later games at some point. At least in the more action-oriented games, because I think they really throw a wrench in the gameplay loop to really keep you on your toes, and it works well. I may or may not be pronouncing this correctly, but the Scarmiglione, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, are probably one of my favorite enemies in the entire game. They have a blade for an arm and then a shield for another as they protect their weak spots, and in some situations you might find yourself destroying only one half of them, and the other half comes to still attack you, so you still gotta put it down. I've only seen the torso come after me, so I'm unsure if you can destroy their legs, but let me know if you've seen it happen, because I'm really interested if this is possible. Rachel Ooze. I'm not even really certain if this is a boss fight, but they present her as someone of importance. But honestly, throughout the story, she really doesn't have that much importance at all. I mean, you watch her die initially, but you kind of write it off as just witnessing a random person getting murked by an ooze. She's just whatever. I could live without this character existing in the entirety of the game, because outside of needing to go find like a key or something that she might have had because she was working alongside Raymond, that's about all the importance she has. But then there's Jack Norman, a character who you really don't interact with at all and is honestly one of the most forgettable villains in any Resident Evil game. But he is the final boss fight for this game, and I want to like it so bad, but he really filtered my ass. He has this decoy mechanic that can trip you up, and like, okay, that's great. Then you have to shoot his heart before he attacks, otherwise you take damage. Alright, that's great, it's all good, it's all fine. But I swear, sometimes he gives you almost no time to react. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think this is a good boss fight. When you're shooting his heart, sometimes the hitbox just doesn't register anything. So he just attacks you anyway. It's really irritating. Not in a way where it's like, okay, this is a skill issue, but now the game's just fucking with me. Also, this game has a dodge mechanic. There isn't any dedicated button for it like in other games. It's more like the original RE3, where it's bound to a prompt that is bound to another whole-ass action completely separate from it. While at RE3, it was aiming and pressing the fire button at the same time that an enemy attacks, here, I don't even know what button is actually causing it. I think it may be the W key. I don't know what it is on a controller, but I think that may have caused it, but the comparison doesn't stop there, as it is arguably less reliable than the dodge in RE3. It's either you dodge by complete accident or you take a hit. But then you have the story, and oh man.
You said yourself, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. But I'm not Dante.
Bless me with the lead.
This is a prequel to the events of RE5, and it is another Chris and Jill reunion, with most of your playtime being in control of Jill. You do play as the other characters as well, but it's mostly Jill. I like Parker and O'Brien, but the rest of the newbies I didn't really have any feelings towards, except maybe Jessica, and it's just because of how aggressive she was flirting with Chris. Like, I'd get it if it was RE5 Chris, but holy fuck, this dude's ugly without even the slightest bit of facial hair. But yeah, otherwise, I don't know, I didn't find her that great of a character. Though I gotta be honest, the story started feeling all over the place towards the latter half of the game. It doesn't help that the story is structured as a TV show, labeling missions as episodes and beginning each episode with a previously on montage right before you begin the chapter. And I get why they did it, with having the game originally made for the 3DS, you know, you're not gonna play this game in one sitting. I mean, most people probably wouldn't. I wouldn't play the 3DS version in one sitting. But I don't know, weirdly I found it grating and it made the experience feel a lot longer than it actually was. Apparently, it took me less than 6 hours to beat, yet I swear it took me like at least 10. It felt like that. The story here has interesting concepts, but a lot of the reveals end up falling flat for me. This game goes for a more spy thriller kind of vibe, and I think that's neat, but I wish there was more things alluding to the inevitable reveals that happen later in the story. Maybe I missed stuff in the first half, but I don't know. The reveal of Jessica being the mole in the BSAA for the FPC, but later revealing that Raymond was also a spy, and then also having post-credit scenes revealing that they are working together, and even learning that they worked for Tricell. It didn't do anything for me. I think the worst scene, though, has to be Parker's death scene, or fake death scene, because Raymond ends up saving him not long after the scene. I also can't be wrong for thinking they implied that Keith and Quinn got blown up by a missile, right? Like, they made that implication so loud, and they don't really show up in any of the story after that, but they lived, apparently. Listen, I can stand one fake death, but you're pushing it with 3 fake deaths, killing off 3 characters, and implying that they're dead, and then them not being dead. Come on. One thing I always found odd about Revelations was the partner you get in each level. Every now and then your partner does stay behind, but it really seemed like there would be co-op for the campaign. But there isn't. That's where raid mode comes in, which is this game's side mode. It has you picking a loadout for your character and going through the areas in the campaign and killing enemies and trying to make it to the end of the level. It's not bad. I didn't play it too much as I didn't really feel like grinding it to get the full experience, but from the little I played, it's actually pretty good. I like it. But yeah, Resident Evil Revelations is a good game, but I find that people kind of overhype this game a little bit. I've seen countless amounts of people say this game is one of the best in the series, and at least for me, I just don't see it. I find it really impressive for a handheld game, but put it on any other platform and it's just kind of good and not much more to it than that. I'm a bit sad about it too because I really wanted to love this game, but as of now, it's a B tier game for me. Moving on. Alright, let's get this over with. Released on March 20th of 2012 in North America, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. This is what I don't like about Resident Evil spin-offs. You take the name of the series, you make it play like a Dollar Tree variant of popular games of its time, and make it feel, at best, just fine mechanically with so little going for it. I don't want to talk about this game for very long because it really is just not good. It plays like your usual cover shooter if it was picked up out of a trash can. Enemies are way too bullet spongy for any real reason, adding such an unnecessary brutal edge to its difficulty that doesn't even make surviving every encounter feel rewarding, and it doesn't make it feel any bit more engaging than it is. And let me tell you, this is one of the least engaging shooters I have ever played. On top of that, the cover system's downright terrible. Like, you have to walk into it just to be able to actually, like, go into cover. And you can't peek out of it because of how aggressive the enemies with the guns are. They will gun you down immediately, and they just have aimbot. I don't know, it's like their guns are hit scan, but when you shoot at an enemy, it's like you're shooting a projectile at them. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. The game's unnecessarily hard for no reason. The game was meant to be a 4-player co-op game, but if you play in single player, you get 3 idiots as your teammates who do nothing but get downed, forcing you to revive them. Is there positives to this? Sure. I like how many guns there are. You use experience points to unlock the guns. I also like the character selection. I like that each of them has some sort of difference in ability. I like Vector. He looks kinda awesome. That's all. I will admit I didn't bother finishing the single player for this game. Is it unfair? Absolutely, I do not care. Not a very fun game, and this was a waste of 3 hours. F tier.
Resident Evil 6.
Released on October 31st of 2019, Luigi's Mansion 3. Maybe not one of the best sequels ever, but it was a damn good time. You can never go wrong with a new Luigi's Mansion, and I think this game is yet another good entry in the series, putting you in a hotel with 17 different floors to explore, each one consisting of its own unique visual style and atmosphere, and it creates a really unique experience on a Nintendo Switch. The boss fights being some of my favorites in the series as well. I really love the night duel and the piano guy. Each fight feels so unique from one another and also has a good challenge to them. The game also introduces Luigi, who can be used to unlock locked rooms, adding another level of depth to the puzzle solving in this game. I'm gonna put this game into A tier. Okay, fine. I'll just get it over with since we made it this far. Resident Evil 6, released on October 2nd of 2012. I see people trying to revise history regarding this game and make excuses for it. Oh, if this wasn't called Resident Evil, it'd be considered a good game. No, I don't like Resident Evil 6, to the point where I'm not going to be fair towards this game in this ranking. My vitriolic hatred towards this game is going to show. The level design is some of the most linear we have ever seen in a mainline title, and arguably worse than some of the spin-offs too. There is no exploration to be done in these levels. Even compare this to a game that started the trend of action and more linear level design, RE4. There was still things to go around and find. On top of that, the game takes control out of your hands way more than any game has ever done in the series. I get it, right? Action set pieces and whatnot, it's mandatory Resident Evil has those nowadays. But the game does it so many times. Action isn't even my problem with the game. Resident Evil is pretty much been tied to action since Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 3 was the first game to fully go a bit balls to the wall with the action, right? But in RE6, it's paced so badly. All the game knows how to do is action, action, action. You are not allowed to breathe. On top of this, you still have QuickTime events, and they are at their absolute worst here. Specifically, the joystick QuickTime events, and I am mad about this solely over the specific section, and it's the door in Jake's campaign. What was it, chapter 3? Or is it end of chapter 2? In Jake's campaign, when Ustanok chases you, and me and my friend just could not figure out what to do for this one. The door was opening way too slow and we kept dying. Turns out you need to use both joysticks to make it turn faster, and the game does not tell you that once. It makes every joystick QTE a lot faster and more manageable on controller, but it's a hidden mechanic that is never told to you. Why? My biggest gripe with the game, though, has to be the 4 different campaigns. This game has an Avengers-sized cast, with having 8 different playable characters, and each campaign is about 5 to 6 hours long in length, making one playthrough, if you want to do all campaigns to get the full story, take up to 20 hours. Kinda defeats the point of being called a Resident Evil, a series known for relatively short games in length and are made to be played over and over again to get faster times and higher scores. Even with the longer titles like RE4 and 5, you are still able to beat those games relatively fast. It sucks too because the actual movement and combat mechanics here are some of the best in the series too. The game feels so fluid, kinda similar to like a Max Payne 3 without the bullet time. And then you have the melee combat, which you can perform at any time without even needing to stagger an enemy. It works so well until the game shoots you in the kneecaps with the stamina bar. Listen, I get why stamina bars are here in this game, but if you're gonna make the game a complete balls to the wall action game with no chill whatsoever, why not just go all out? Because at least then, I can have fun roundhouse kicking people for an eternity. On top of that, this game probably has the most diabolical ammo management in the entire series. This is what gets me. They want you to actually use and engage with the melee combat and use finishers and whatnot. And that's all good, that's cool, it's all fun to pull off, but they barely give you any ammo at all. RE6 has the ammo scarcity of a survival horror game, which if it was in any other RE game besides 4 and 5, it would have worked very well. But RE6 is not that. It's a high-octane, adrenaline-boosting action game. This doesn't work. Oh, and let's not forget the change they made to the herbs. The health system is changed into these segmented squares. One herb heals for 1 square, and you can regenerate a square if it wasn't entirely depleted. But oh my lord, this change is miserable. If you want more herbs, you gotta combine them with other ones, or just red ones, so you can get more out of them, and then you gotta store them into a case so you can use them. And then you just start popping pills. I don't like this. I think using 1 herb to fill out 1 square is just so miserable. I'll give the game some positives though, and it probably only has one, and that is the fact that Mercenaries is really good. It all comes down to the gameplay mechanics, really, and less so the level design and whatnot, but wow, Mercenaries here is some of the best in the series. I don't know if I like it more than 5, but I actually really have a lot of fun playing RE6 Mercenaries. And it's because RE6 has a really nice feeling gameplay loop that the main campaign just never fully taps into. Also, I like the HUDs with each character in each campaign. I like how different they are. And if you play Jake, once you get to chapter 3 or a little bit past that, his actually changes because he has a different phone. It's a nice detail. The music's not that bad either. I just kind of find it forgettable, but none of it ever stands out in my mind, and there's never any situations in the game where the music stands out for me like in previous titles. Story-wise, there's too much going on here. Each campaign has quite a bit to unpack on their own, and at the length they are at, they just kind of drag on and on. It feels more like quantity over quality. The idea of multiple branching storylines with the characters crossing each other's paths isn't a bad idea on paper, but at least in RE6's case, the execution was just not good at all. I know I'm saying a whole lot of nothing regarding it, I'm just saying a bunch of meaningless words here, but it's just due to the fact that there is just so much here, and I'm never given the time to process what I'm experiencing. Also, Derek Simmons is one of the most just forgettable villains in the entire series. Even RE6 fans forget that he's even here. Overall, I don't like RE6. Amongst the mainline titles, I think it's the worst one, even if there is one that I dislike even more than this. I'm gonna put Resident Evil 6 in D tier. Moving on. So I was gonna start with the release date like I did with every other game, but this game decided to be episodic, and I got lazy reading all the release dates. And yeah, you heard that right, this game's episodic. None of that Telltale bullshit though, this is a real man's game. From my understanding, each episode released a week after each other, and there's 4 total, but it kinda made the full release a bit confusing, at least on digital storefronts. But I gotta be honest with you guys, I actually kinda love this game. Shockingly so, too. This is one of the few games in the series, at least out of the ones that are still currently available on storefronts, that I had not played before. Revelations 1 I had just been off and on with since like 2022, but this was a completely blind experience, and going into it, I was a bit excited, mostly because it was a Claire game, but we also got to play as Barry Blickham Down Burton. I don't even know where to start when it comes to this game, but I am a bit shocked at the reception this game got on Metacritic compared to Revelations 1. Well, at least compared to the 3DS version, which in hindsight makes a ton of sense. Now yes, it did garner mostly positive reviews, but it was still lower than the overall for Revelations 1. But to me, this game just feels so much better to play than Revelations 1. The dodge mechanic actually has its own button this time. We are saved. It does lead to the game feeling a lot easier to get out of certain encounters once you master the timing of dodging and everything, which is actually pretty easy to master, all things considered. But that's the weird part to me, is that despite that, the game still has a good challenge to it. The game felt noticeably harder than Revelations 1, and arguably harder than some of the mainline games up to this point. More specifically, a game like RE6. I may have died a similar amount of times as I did in Revelations 1, but I felt more challenged in this game. No longer is it relegated to just boss fights, but even just in regular encounters. The enemies hit harder, they move quicker, keeping them as a threat at any point in the game without making them bullet spongy. There are tankier enemies too, but they are just the bigger monsters that you come to expect. On top of that, the resource management is sort of a return to form in this game, as the game kinda strings you along when it comes to resources. You'll barely find any ammo drops at times, and you'll be running out quite often. There's even a part of the game towards the very end in the final episode where they straight up just stop giving you like any reasonable amounts of ammo. Normally a stack of pistol bullets will give you like 15 and then like 28 for like rifle bullets, at least in Barry's chapter. This part of the game specifically, for this 5 to 10 minutes of gameplay, you might find anywhere from 3 to 5 pistol bullets a stack, maybe 8 to 10 bullets for the assault rifle. It's quite evil, to be honest. The variety of enemies we get in Rev 2 is also pretty similar to the first game though. Instead of the ooze, however, we have the afflicted, who totally don't look like something out of the Evil Within. Another good game, I recommend playing it. You also have the Ironheads, who are kind of like weaker executioners from RE5, and I really do mean weaker. They can be taken down with just 2 shotgun shells. It's kind of crazy. You also have the Rotten, which are just resurrected afflicted and happen to be slower and just easier to kill enemies, like one shot with a pistol easy. But one of the standouts for me is the glass, because they got on my nerves very easily. They are bugs that are completely invisible. You encounter them for the first time in Barry's side of the game, if I remember correctly. They aren't like the cloaking hunters who will dip in and out of that cloak every now and then. They are just invisible, you cannot see them. So you use this little girl named Natalia, who Barry meets on the island for some reason. And she can see enemies through walls, and if you crouch, you get an even larger radius that you can see enemies with. So you can use her to pinpoint exactly where the glass are. They also do make a noise and distort your vision the closer they get to you, so you don't have to entirely rely on her, but at the same time, she will also pinpoint them for you if you're not playing as her and swapping between them. She'll also yell at you if you're kind of like way off in the direction that you're shooting in, like she'll yell at you to go like more right or more left. They also do have a one-shot move, which is yeah, really annoying. The level design isn't exactly what I'd consider a high point in this game though, but it at least seems to be headed in the right direction this time. There's a little bit of areas you can explore to get items and interact with the map and whatnot, but it still has yet to see a full improvement on the formula, as you mostly just run in a straight line for most of the game. But visually speaking, this is probably one of the most bleak games in the series. There is so little variety in the color palette here. It is all gray and desolate and ugly. The game just looks and feels so hopeless. And it makes sense. It takes place on an abandoned island in the Baltic Sea. I like that Revelations 2, just as the first one, did take another shot at trying to push the series more back into a horror atmosphere, except I think Revelations 2 pushes it even further. The music and ambience feels a lot more unsettling in comparison, and dare I say, I found this one to be a much scarier game too. The music though, for the most part, is still forgettable though, unfortunately, with one of the most memorable tracks in the entire game being just the main menu theme, which is simply just a redone version of the first game's main theme, which I think was more fitting in that one than here. The game also has you swapping between two characters as I mentioned, similarly to RE0. Claire and Barry are the shooty guys, they get to use the guns and will be who you prioritize playing the most. But the secondary character, Moira and Natalia, don't use guns at all and are used for different reasons. Moira uses her flashlight, which can stun enemies, or she can beat people to death with a crowbar. Natalia, on the other hand, has the greatest weapon of all time, the brick. I'd say the character swapping feels pretty great, arguably better here than it did in Zero, even if sometimes the AI partner isn't too responsive, but it is neat to see this mechanic come back from Zero. Both having their own health and status effects like bleeding to manage, and even using the secondary character to find items by pointing or shining a light at them to let the primary character pick them up. But the most shocking thing to me is that this is one of the few RE games where I actually liked the story here. Not even just liked, kind of loved, honestly. It's not all good. The dialogue can be really hit or miss. Moira is proof of that, which is why a lot of people don't like her, but it's because of Barry Burton for me. We never got much of Barry in the series. I liked him as a side character quite a bit in the original game and the remake. If you respect Gaiden as a game, this is technically the only second game to make Barry a playable character. And this game made Barry one of my goats. I think he is so well written here. He's just trying to find his daughter, even if he was 6 months late. And in Claire's side, you will hear Moira complain about Barry, and yes, even get a reference to the Jill sandwich line. But in Barry's side, he will eventually tell Natalia about what caused the split between him and Moira. And I really like how you can hear him start to blame Moira for the event that happened, but eventually change course and fully take responsibility for what happened. Because what originally caused it was Barry not locking his guns up properly, and Moira grabbing one and messing around with it and shooting her sister. And of course this led to them fighting, and they fought more and more as time went on until they split apart. And I really like the voice acting here too. You can hear it's breaking Barry. It's hurting him, and he just wants things to get better. It's great. It's a really good story. I don't want to say too much because this is one of the few stories that is so good, but honestly at this point, game's been out for over 10 years now. Go play it. The game also has 2 endings, which is decided based on who kills Neil at the end of this boss fight. Good boss fight, by the way, nothing crazy, but I had fun with it. If Moira kills Neil, voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, then you get the good ending where Barry shoots Alex Wesker. Yes, Alex Wesker. You get her to drop Natalia, and it leads to a second Alex fight, both of which are pretty fun fights. But the good ending also has Barry aura farming. Though both endings kinda lead the same way, the bad ending kinda just has Alex taking control of Natalia immediately, and the good ending has a post-credits scene that kind of implies that Alex still lives on through Natalia. So either way, the same thing kinda happens. The game also received bonus episodes in the Struggle and Little Miss, with Little Miss being a more stealth-oriented level, and the Struggle being more of a survival mode. But they fill in certain plot holes from the main episodes, like how Moira survived in the good ending, and how Natalia got to the island. They are technically DLC, but I am going to rank them the same as the main game, but I want to at least acknowledge them. Raid mode returns, and it's pretty much the same mode, but with way more missions, characters, weapons, parts, and uses scenarios seen in RE5, 6, and Revelations. Even using characters from those games too. In hindsight, I really do appreciate both this and the first Revelations game for existing. I may not get the hype for the first game now, and don't consider it one of the best like others do, but I do appreciate these games for helping push the series back into what made it so good to begin with. I don't think either of these games really saved the series from RE6, well, not entirely, but they were, as Sonic fans say, a step in the right direction. But I am shocked that I have kind of fallen in love with this game the way I did. I'm going to slot Revelations 2 into A tier. Probably towards the bottom due to other games here having stronger gameplay, but amazing nonetheless. Moving on. At some point, you just need to let it go, right? Like, I'm not crazy for saying this. Umbrella Corps, released on June 21st of 2016. This is meant to be some sort of online multiplayer tactical shooter, but you can play as Hunk. It's quite funny that this game gets described as a tactical shooter because this game has the mechanics of a Call of Duty game at the pace of a Call of Duty game. And even worse than that, it's worse than some of the worst Call of Duty games at that. Doesn't really matter now though, as the game is completely dead. I tried several times and could not get into any of the multiplayer game modes. So instead, you get to hear my opinion on the single player mode called The Experiment. This is one of the most worthless experiences I have ever gotten out of a video game, and it sucks. I don't like feeling empty playing video games or even hating games, but when I look at the reception of this game back when it released, it makes sense. I can only imagine how bad the online was, but The Experiment is such an empty experience. You are given a plethora of missions that all blend together for a bit until it's time to move on to a new location. Visually, the game looks like an upscaled mobile game, but I think the RE4 Village is where it looks the absolute worst. Not to mention, the Ganados and zombie models look so out of place, like placing a 144p image onto a 1440p video. It doesn't work out for you. The level design itself, too, is just so uninteresting on the gameplay side of things, too. At least in The Experiment, they are so small and yet have staircases and other things that are blocked off, which clearly connected to other parts of the map, but in certain missions they are locked off, and then in some of them they aren't. What is the point of this? They really don't need to be blocked off at all. You just kind of made all the levels smaller for no real reason at all. And the missions that they have you doing in these areas are not benefited by these either. You have like this DNA collector thing. You kill a zombie, they drop DNA, you run over, collect it. They have you do that like 5 times in a row. Like, I think it's the most common mission out of all 24 levels in that, because there's 24 levels. And most of it, I'm pretty sure, is just chalked up to collecting DNA. You do have like the finding these like briefcase things, but it's basically the same thing, except you find 5 briefcases and you know exactly where they are, so not much of a challenge there. And then you have the domination mode. I don't know why they put this in a single player mode. There's lore to this, by the way. There's like lore they made lore for this, and it's so unimportant that you wouldn't even remember it. I don't even remember it. I just realized that when I was looking up things about it, and I found a wiki, and there's lore of this. Why? The gunplay too, it's just so weightless. The sound design could be better, could be worse, but it does not serve the gunplay any favors at all. It doesn't even feel like I'm shooting a gun, because most enemies go down in like 1 hit, so it felt like I was just pointing at them and killing them with my mind. Wait, why am I still talking about this game? You knew I was going to say this from the very beginning. You knew I wasn't going to like this game. F tier. Just straight up F tier. I want to play a good game again. Finally, we can talk about good video games again. Released on January 24th of 2017, Resident Evil 7 is quite an important game in my eyes. Maybe not to the greater gaming landscape as RE1 and 4 were, but for the series at the very least, it definitely was. With RE6 being by far the worst received mainline entry in the series critically, and while Revelations I thought was a pretty good game, as did many others, that game got overshadowed not by just releasing on the 3DS at the time, but also releasing within the same year as the next mainline entry, and with releases like Operation Raccoon City and Umbrella Corp, and Rev 2, which was generally well liked, but not to the extent of the first one. This game kinda had a chip on its shoulder going into it. This is the first mainline title to be completely in first person. The only example of an FPS RE game was the Survivor games and half of Dead Aim, and I think it really works for this game. I think overall the game is very great, but at the same time I also kinda just don't enjoy replaying it all that much compared to most of the mainline titles. But before I get into why that is, let me talk about what I like about the game first. So Ethan is one of the more slightly controversial main protags of the mainline entries, and while I definitely don't love him here, I still like him at least a little bit. His voice direction is most certainly awkward, and some lines definitely sound a bit bizarre, but he is just a regular ass guy getting brutalized as he is exploring the Baker residence. The Baker family themselves I adore. I love how unique of antagonists they are for the series at this point, and while Evelyn I do find to be slightly weaker than someone like Jack, I still think it works for me overall, with Jack and Lucas specifically being what I think are the 2 standouts in this game for me personally. The vibe of this game too is just something else. You can obviously tell which horror movies inspired this game, and it's so cool to me. It feels like playing through an Evil Dead or a Texas Chainsaw game, if they were good. Visually, it definitely does have a bit of growing pains since this was the first entry made on the RE engine, yet I still think it holds up remarkably well and will continue to do so. The Baker's house is probably one of my favorite atmospheres in the series as well. Once you make it out of the main house and get a whiff of that Dovey swamp, it is great. Gunplay feels really solid for this game too. It's not much of an action shooter. Throughout the game, I must say, I have no complaints with how the guns feel, and I think from this point onward, it's really only improved on this engine since. And finally, story-wise, I think this is one of the stronger cuts we've had in a long time, probably since maybe 3 for me personally, the original one. Not to say games like Revelations and 5 had bad stories, but I prefer what they were trying to go with in 7, despite its absurdity. Also, the multiple endings come back here as well, which was a long time coming, and it's okay. It just feels a little like it was just thrown in there to be there because the classics had it, but it's not an issue for me. It's just something that's like there. I also gotta mention the Stalker enemies. It's mostly Jack that feels like one. Sure, Marguerite is kind of one, but again, neither of them are around long enough to where it really left a lasting impression on me compared to others. Now to the negatives. The boat sucks. It's such a dreadfully boring location, and it nearly drags RE7 down because of it. The atmosphere just doesn't feel tense at all, not eerie, not anything really. You get a PP-19 out of it, but is it even really worth it? A lot of people don't like this section, and unfortunately I have to agree with that consensus here. The game isn't even very long. It usually takes about 8 hours to get from the beginning to end if you are playing for the first time, but the boat feels like it takes forever. And it's this location specifically that makes me just dread replaying this game. I don't really have fun with it. On the other hand, the inventory menu not pausing the game is certainly interesting, isn't it? Not a terrible change, but I'm glad this never made a return in later entries. Call it a skill issue, but for a series known for item management, this just kind of feels evil. Like The Resident. My only other gripe is the enemy design and variety, or lack thereof, because it is extremely scarce in this game. You could argue that with a much slower pace and focus on survival horror, it's not as big of a deal as it would be in 4 or 5, but there's deadass only 2 different species of enemies here, the molded and the bugs. That's it. Sure, there's 3 different kind of molded, with the fat guy that can occasionally spit stuff that damages you, and the crawler which will absolutely scare the shit out of you, but the bugs literally are just oversized bugs, and they go down in like 1 hit and nothing more. I also forgot to write in my script the boss fights. I don't know, they're okay. I think the Marguerite one is kind of terrifying with her crawling up and down the walls, and if you lose sight of her and then she jumps you, it's kind of terrifying. Jack, on the other hand, the multiple Jack fights, I think the chainsaw one's like extremely difficult. That one kicked my ass a lot of times, and it makes Madhouse runs like actually painful. But other than that, they're alright. Again, Resident Evil is not something I go to for boss fights. It's the general gameplay that I keep coming back for, but I have no complaints there. Everything all said and done, I think RE7 is a fantastic title and a great bounce back for Capcom during this time. So for that, I will be placing RE7 into A tier as of now, at the very top. And in regards to the DLCs, I think these are some of the best DLC we have seen in the series, with a few standouts. I personally love 21, which is a deadly game of blackjack, and Bedroom, which is an escape room where you had to escape this room. Yeah, it's an escape room where you escape this room. But you are under a strict time limit, because if Marguerite notices you left the bed, you essentially lose. One of the more intense DLCs, and I think it's very good. I also really like Not a Hero, which has you playing as Chris Redfield and trying to stop Lucas and also rescue his missing squad mates, and it's just a good DLC. End of Zoe is also pretty great as well. This one has you playing as Joe Baker, Jack's brother, and he tries to save Zoe, and the gameplay is melee focused, having you eventually finding an arm that has you punching the molded's heads off. It's great. So for the DLC as a whole, I'm going to place it in A tier alongside RE7 as well, even with Ethan Must Die and Nightmare, even if I just found those to be just okay, because I think the rest of the DLC more than makes up for it. Released back on January 25th of 2019, Resident Evil 2 Remake. It's very weird to me because we as a community all refer to this game as RE2 Remake. But is it really a remake? What even are remakes? Is this a remake? Or is this a remake? What makes a remake a remake? Well, I'm not here to answer that. I'm here to rank Resident Evil 2 on a tier list. Resident Evil 2 Remake, while I am calling it a remake, and will continue to refer to it by that name, but this game doesn't feel much like a remake at all. When you compare it to the original game, it doesn't feel anything similar to what RE1 Remake was, but it feels more like an adaptation of the original, or a better term that I see more people have been using lately is a reimagining. Like, the game has the same things as RE2, Leon, Claire, Mr. X, William Birkin, Sherry Birkin, the RPD. Yet, unlike RE1 Remake, which keeps things mostly intact and just kind of adds a bunch of things and even changes certain gameplay mechanics, and even adds what I'd consider maybe quality of life changes as well, at its core, it still is the original game. The same story, but in a more serious tone, even adding more story onto it that couldn't make the original cut. RE2 really isn't much like that outside of maybe the story, which is similar, but the dialogue is pretty different. I mean, tone was gonna be more serious. I think we all figured that out ever since RE7 came out, that the games would get more serious. But RE2 didn't get the treatment that RE1 got, which I would have adored if they ever tried to do that. Hey Capcom, if you ever get lazy and need something cheap to make, I got an idea for you. My main point for even bringing up any of this at all is that I'd say RE2 kinda sucks as a remake, but it manages to be one of the best entries in the series despite that. And that's really funny to me. I gotta say, the level design here is absolutely the best aspect of the entire game. Exploring the RPD on this scale when the game initially came out in 2019 was so cool, but even today, it's just so cool. Visually, it's stunning. You can definitely see Capcom hitting their strides within the RE engine, and while I still don't think it's the best looking game they've made yet, but at the same time, the Resident Evil 2 Remake burger is also the biggest advancement in graphics that we've had. But amongst all the locations you go through, I think the RPD is the best, and I think the game just kind of starts getting slightly worse over time. But again, it doesn't drop below an 8/9 out of 10 for me because the game has such a great feel to it. The RPD just feels like Resident Evil's classic level design, near perfected for the modern era. The atmosphere is so good. I always feel uneasy playing this game. All you hear is your own footsteps, the rain slamming the glass, your own breathing, and then bam, a zombie outside just smashes the window. On top of this, I think the balance of backtracking around the RPD feels perfect. There's a great level of pacing to this to get the medallions and getting all the keys and stuff and unlocking all the doors and making it to the garage. It feels perfect. It doesn't feel like it's overdone. The pacing overall for a regular playthrough feels great, while also leaving me wanting more even after I get out of this area. The sewers is generally seen as a low point in this game, and I absolutely agree. Some chalk it up to being difficult, I chalk it up to feeling slow and dragged down, and I just think it sucks. It's not even that long of a segment, visually speaking. I mean, it's a sewer. Can't really be all that interesting without it not being a sewer. Just for me personally, I don't like spending the next 20 to 30 minutes trudging through slow, nasty-ass water. I think the pacing generally is fine, have you going around looking for chess pieces and whatnot, and I don't really think it's one of the worst in a lot of RE games, but in comparison to the RPD, it's just not comparable at all. I think my disdain for this area definitely has to do with just how much there was to the RPD, to the layout, and just how good the RPD was. But then you have the government mandated lab segment, and I think it's fine. I actually like this more than the sewer. It feels like just a classic case of a Resident Evil game peaking into the first location, at least. The enemy variety feels a little low for this game compared to the original, but we still got a decent variety, I think. The zombies are pretty tanky. I feel like they are tankier than they were in the original. Headshots are also pretty inconsistent on them, and I think this was the game that started that randomness in certain mechanics. The Ivy, they are here, but honestly, I don't really care for their design in the remake. I much prefer the original design. It looked a lot more distinct from the zombies. However, here, it just looks like a vine zombie with some weak spots. However, I do understand the change of the Ivy's visuals because in the original, you could argue kind of out of place in that game. I wouldn't argue that, but I've been told that argument before, and I can kind of get it. However, here they definitely feel a lot more fitting since they look a lot similar to actual zombies. They aren't even bad enemies or anything. I think the idea of them being researchers infected by Plant 43 is kinda scary. The G-type adults make a return. They are in the sewer. These guys I found annoying. If possible, I always make sure to just avoid them instead of wasting ammo till I get the flamethrower. They did remove the evolved lickers, which for lore reasons I think is sad to see, but for the gameplay side of things, I love how much stronger the lickers feel in this game. It kinda feels just like regular lickers if they were as strong as the evolved ones. However, the one everyone mostly loves in this game, I think most people love this one, Mr. X. They turned him into a complete stalker. He knows where you are at all times, and he is great. He adds another level of tension to the game, almost rushing you to get things done, to get out of that location in a way. He has a very imposing stature and presence at all times, until you go into the room he refuses to go into. Some might find him annoying, but I find him to add so much to this experience, and is one of the few things that I think the remake outright does better than the original in my opinion. The boss fights are pretty alright. There is several Birkin fights, and I do still love seeing Birkin as he transforms further. I think the third form of Birkin is my favorite boss fight, mostly due to how cool he looks, and I mean, can you blame me? He looks awesome. Story-wise, I think the game is pretty strong in its own right. However, it also leads to my biggest issue with the game, the lack of the zapping system. The lack of the zapping system really does call into question of why the A and B scenarios are even here. One thing I do like about them is the different weapons both Leon and Claire find in their playthroughs, though the positives for me on that front end there, because really outside of that, you're just playing the same game again. At least story-wise, it feels like it plays out the same, and then you go through the same boss fights, which really feels weird. Item placements may be different, and you do access the chief's office, and of course, in Claire's story, you do meet Sherry, and then you have the orphanage segment, but more importantly, the boss fights are just the exact same. You fight the exact same Birkin fights as both characters in both scenarios, and that's just really lame to me. However, the biggest story critique I have is that Leon just doesn't interact with Sherry at all in this game until the very end, which I find very weird. Removing the part where Leon even helps out saving Sherry in the original just feels so disappointing. For the music, this is another one of the weaker parts, but honestly, it's still pretty good. I like the save theme, but I'll be real, I didn't find any of the soundtrack all that memorable as what you get in older titles. I think it's pretty good, but again, a lot of music doesn't really play outside of like boss fights and the save theme and stuff, so there's not really much else to say about it. Overall, I think RE2 Remake is an amazing experience. However, as a remake of RE2 specifically is when things get shaky. However, despite my criticisms, I still really love the experience, and especially think the RPD alone makes it one of the best experiences in the franchise. So for that, it will be yet another S tier. Moving on. Released on April 3rd of 2020, Resident Evil 3 Remake. If only it released 2 days sooner, it would be the greatest April Fool's prank of all time. There's so much that can and already has been said about this game, but the most important thing is that it's just really disappointing. I think your thoughts on this game really depend on whatever you thought about the original, but for me, playing the original made me dislike the game more. See, for me, this was my first exposure to the story of RE3 and Nemesis as a character. I bought it on release because I loved RE2 Remake when it came out, and I've been a big RE fan for most of my life at this point. And so I saved up money and was excited to buy this game and play it, and I played it in one sitting, and this game started that tradition for me where I attempt to beat every Resident Evil in one sitting, which is very fun. I like doing it, and you know, I do like that the game started that for me. But unfortunately, this game is just Potential Man the game. There's so much from the original that never made it into this game that I think had potential to even surpass the original's quality. Yet so much was left out in favor of stuff from RE2 Remake instead. One of my friends told me that they think once you leave the streets of Raccoon City, the game just turns into an asset flip of RE2 Remake. And I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I think the Raccoon City streets is by far the best part of the game, and I wish it was a bit longer. See, out of the RE Engine games, RE3 is by far the shortest game they released, which is pretty faithful to the original, which was also the shortest game of the classic trilogy. But I think part of why it feels so short-lived here in Raccoon City is because instead of visiting places in the original like the park or the clock tower, instead we get another sewer segment, and even more surprising, a lab segment. These areas are fine when they were in RE2 Remake because RE2 had them, but you put them in RE3 Remake and they feel odd, especially if you know anything about the original. Especially because in RE3, the sewer that was in the original was so short-lived because it was relegated to the first encounter with the Gravedigger worm, which, by the way, he does not show up at all. All your boss fights are with Nemesis. I wish I was kidding, because I really like the Gravedigger worm. I like his boss fight in the park, even if I thought it was really easy. You have 5 difficulties in this game, so that problem would have been sorted out. But yet, he's nowhere to be seen, because the 2 segments that you would have seen him at are just gone. But back to the Raccoon City streets, I think they were translated into the RE engine pretty well. I think part of why it feels shorter than it is comes down to missing the park and the clock tower, as those were extensions to Raccoon City that we got to see. But what we do get here, I think flows pretty well. I love exploring it, even if it's extremely linear and there's way less interconnectivity in here than there is in the original. There is still a clock puzzle though, not really a puzzle, but you gotta collect these gems that you get rewards for putting into the clock. I think it's pretty cool, you know, you get a bunch of different rewards when you put a gem into it, and I think that's great. I love when they incentivize backtracking and exploring. I just wish that there was more interconnectivity between the level design. Unfortunately though, they did take Nemesis out back and shot him. What really sucks about Nemesis is they do let him off the leash a couple times, and it's the game at its most intense. It's some of my favorite moments in the game, and hell, you could argue some of the best moments in the entire series. I wouldn't go that far, but if you said it, I wouldn't give too much pushback on it. But most of his screen time is just reserved for set pieces. So I think there needed to be a little bit more balance between that, especially when RE2 Remake introduced us to Mr. X as a relentless stalker type, and instead just a fully scripted Nemesis. Which, yes, Nemesis in the original is entirely scripted, but he was allowed to pursue you when they scripted those moments. Sure, there was set pieces from time to time. Yes, there was scripted boss fights. But in those areas where he's chasing you around, those are still intense. You can make those work. In fact, I think the remake had opportunities to make this unscripted and make him worse than he was in the original. Make him more terrifying. Make him a huge threat in comparison. Let him be the pursuer he's meant to be. And I think that's another reason why I don't like this, is because I wish there was more opportunities to be hunted by him during gameplay. Though I will give them some credit, I think the final boss fight for Nemesis is much better than in the original game. I mean, in the original, he kind of just falls over. Sure, you have the quick selection thing at the end, but here is a lot more of a cinematic fight. This huge amalgamation that looks almost incomprehensible, though I think this should have been when Jill said the stars line and not in the hallway when she gets punched in the back. Speaking about Jill, I don't mind Jill in this game. People call her boring, but I don't know. She doesn't really seem that bad. I know people think she's also too mean to Carlos, but I think those people need to grow up because she has every reason to hate Umbrella, and so should you. But the part I don't like about her is not even really her fault, but the fact that she feels like she's forced to be less badass. She's nerfed in this game, if you will, because it feels like she's getting saved more often than not. They even swap around the situations between finding Carlos and Brad, with both of them essentially saving Jill's ass, even though it was the other way around. Carlos is the most likable character here, and though I do really like him, and I do wish that he wasn't this likable right off the bat, I wish he got to grow into being this character and maybe start off maybe less likable, more incompetent. Steve, if he wasn't an annoying piece of shit, you know, something like that. Nikolai is once again a villain that really doesn't do anything for me. I guess I'd give the edge to the remake here just because I don't care either way. I didn't really like Nikolai in either version. The music is all solid, I think. A lot of it is remade versions of the original soundtrack, yet for some reason, the save theme is Secure Place. It sounds beautiful, but why is it here and not in RE2 Remake? Why didn't we get Free From Fear, which was another great save theme. The hell is going on here? Overall, I really had a hard time finding much to like about this game, though I do think it's better than RE6 if we're being fair, but especially after playing the original, I just don't find myself liking it. I think it's my least favorite game in the series. While when it first came out though, I did think it was just okay, but it made for a really disappointing introduction to Jill and Nemesis. I was able to find at least a couple nice things about RE3 Remake, but it remains as one of, if not my least favorite games in the series. May not be the worst thing ever created, but I can't really say I'm a fan of it. I had to place this game into D tier, but I could see a reality where it's C tier at best. Moving on. So this might just be one of the most bizarre games in the series. Resident Evil Resistance released alongside RE3 Remake, and dare I say, this game blows too! Resident Evil Resistance is an asymmetrical survival horror game, similar genre to games like Dead by Daylight, Friday the 13th, and Secret Neighbor. What a very promising genre. This game puts 4 survivors in a location and they have to escape, with the other player being a mastermind. And the mastermind's goal is to prevent the survivors from escaping by any means necessary. And by any means necessary, I mean using cards to place zombies around the map, traps, or just to shoot them with a gun because fuck balancing. You have a choice between who you play as too. There is 5 different masterminds. Annette Birkin, a guy named Daniel Fabrone. I've never seen this guy before in my life. They just kind of put this guy in there. He's an original for the game. Alex Wesker is here, which is a very neat pull. I didn't think I'd see her in this game. Nikolai from RE3 Remake is here, and the funniest one to me, which is Oswald Spencer. Each one having their own decks and essentially ultimates as their bioweapon. Annette has William. Nikolai has Nemesis, Spencer has a wall that insta-kills you, Alex has a plant, and for some reason they gave Daniel Mr. X for whatever reason. Between the two differing gameplay styles, I find the Survivor's gameplay more enjoyable than the Mastermind, but not by all that much really, which is disappointing because I would have much rather been a Mastermind had it been actually fun to play. But of course, I don't even get to play that because people are just guaranteed Mastermind, I guess. I'm stuck being Survivor. The Survivors just feel like a very linear mini Resident Evil with a ton of random bullshit thrown your way. Meanwhile, the Mastermind just kind of feels boring. You're in the camera, and while that could be fun, placing zombies and stuff and watching them beat the shit out of the people you're up against, it really just depends on who you play here, though, to be honest. But I honestly think the gun cards are really lame. I'm pretty sure every Mastermind has them, but Nikolai kind of focuses on them. Like, yeah, man, do I want to put some zombies here or blow his shit smooth off? Decisions. Now, I wasn't playing this game when it came out. I usually avoided the spin-offs because of stuff like Umbrella Corps and Operation Raccoon City. So anyone that was big into this game and knows more about it than I do can probably laugh at me for these takes, but man, the game as a whole just doesn't feel all that balanced at all. Though I am a little surprised that I am able to find games pretty often and consistent as I am. I usually never get Mastermind though, so I actually had to go to practice match to experience Mastermind, and that was a mistake because the AI literally stands still and lets the enemies kill them. I learned so much. The game also has a loot box system that you use these points you get from playing games to buy them. I don't think they are paid, but still having equipment locked behind them just won't ever be cool to me. I'm fine with the cosmetics being locked behind a loot box, even if I think some should be relegated to more challenge-like progression or even Call of Duty type of progression. That could have worked too, but honestly, it's hardly a blemish on a game that has so little going for it. I do think out of all the multiplayer attempts so far, this one is probably the more interesting take on it for me. It has so many problems, and I did not have much fun playing it at all, make no mistake. But I think with some refining and Capcom actually committing to an idea for once instead of leaving it out to die, if they truly do care to enter the multiplayer market with Resident Evil as they keep trying to do, it absolutely could work for like a month at least. I'm placing Resistance into D tier. Some may have it lower, diehards may have it higher, but that's where I'm going. Moving on. Resident Evil Village, released back on May 7th of 2021. This might be my most controversial ranking of the entire video, but I have this game pretty high up, and I am ready for the people to be disappointed in this ranking, because I know this one is one of the more mixed titles online, even if it reviewed pretty well critically. But I will stand 10 toes down and say this is one of my favorite games in the entire series. I kind of have a similar, like, nostalgia connection to this game that I did with 4, funnily enough. I was really excited for this game when it was coming out, but I didn't really have the means to actually get it because I was only like 15 at the time. I remember watching a whole Let's Play of the game when it came out because I just couldn't wait. But then me and my mom were in a Target and I just couldn't stop staring at the game on its shelf while we were walking around. I just stood there. I'm like, I need this. And then my mom just looks at me, she's like, do you want this? And I immediately jumped at the opportunity to play the game. And my mother didn't normally get me games unless it was my birthday or Christmas. And even that wasn't a guarantee. So this was like an event. An even bigger event. But when I did get my hands on the game to finally play it, I just couldn't put the game down to save my life. I beat it in one sitting just like I did with RE3 Remake. You might be wondering, oh, who gives a shit? But I'm saying this just to prepare you with the fact that this is by far my most biased ranking in the entire list, even though, you know, the entire list is biased, yes, but you're gonna get that guy that comments like, you rank these games biasedly, and I'm just saying, yeah, I've been doing that the entire time. Glad you noticed. This ranking defies all logic and reasoning, but I'm gonna try and give it reasoning anyway. I think Resident Evil Village is amazing. I do agree that the game peaks within its first half, but many say it falls off after the castle and it just doesn't come back up, and I don't agree with that at all. Let's break it down one by one. Starting with the story. Yeah, it's not great. And even by Resident Evil standards, that's kind of impressive to be not great, but it has possibly the funniest opening of any RE game to date. Except the biggest flaw for me is the attempt to make Chris some sort of antagonistic character of some kind. Having him open up with killing Mia, but also it's not Mia, but Chris refuses to explain until the moment he just goes to fight Heisenberg. I find everything else quite inoffensive for the most part and mostly enjoyable because, again, it's Resident Evil. The writing's never been good. What could have been a slightly interesting plot point in making the Resident Evil guy, John Evil himself, Chris Redfield, a gray character who you can't exactly trust, that's not a bad idea at all. Tackling the idea of him Breaking Bad, I think that could have been fun, but it goes nowhere. You run into him like, what, 2 or 3 times before they drop the idea entirely, but every time you run into him, he's just an asshole, giving you no real reason to actually be on the fence about how you feel about him. The game just wants you to think, damn, I fucking hate that guy. They're just making him unlikable the entire time, and it doesn't actually work for me. With how little he shows up and how quickly this issue gets kind of brushed over just to lead to Ethan's death, it just kind of sucks. Do I think telling Ethan would have saved him from dying? Realistically, no. I think the mold would have gotten to him anyway, which, yeah, the mold from RE7, I don't want to talk about the mold. It's really funny that they even have the nerve to acknowledge that Chris should have told Ethan and they beat him upside the head for it, and reasonably so, but at the same time, it just kind of feels very contrived. But honestly, my bigger issue is just, as I said, it just takes an interesting concept and throws it away without at least trying to build upon it. In terms of characters, for Ethan's case, I actually think I prefer him in Village over 7. I think that might be a hot take, but I don't know. I know people hate Ethan, but I kind of like how awkward his line delivery was in this game, even if he tried to make his own quips, and they almost never landed at all, which made me like Ethan more for it. His line delivery also tends to just be straight up hilariously bad every other time at points, which feels very reminiscent of the classics. Whether that was intentional or not, I have no idea, but it was kind of similar in 7, but I feel like it's even more entertaining here because he tries to be a badass too. My favorite characters in this game, however, are the 4 lords. The standouts are undoubtedly Heisenberg and Lady Dimitrescu. Both Neil Newbin and Maggie Robertson give probably some of my favorite performances in the entire series. It's funny to see Neil in 2 back-to-back Resi games, and while I thought he was alright in 3-make, he is so entertaining in Village, and Maggie is so imposing here as Lady D. It's a shame that you kill her so early into the game because she is amazing. I do kind of want to make a full-blown video dedicated to this game, so I will save the rest of that for that video. But I'll briefly go over some gameplay so we can move on, because I feel like I'm just gonna give this game the most spotlight in the entire video if I keep going. The gunplay, I think, feels a lot stronger than it did in RE7, even if the enemies feel somehow even tankier at points, but the sound design, the animations, the feedback from firing your gun has never looked, sounded, or felt better until now, in my opinion. Sure, it's gotten better since Village came out, but up to this point, a Resident Evil game has never felt better, in my opinion. In terms of level design, I think the castle is easily my favorite part. It feels a bit like what you come to expect from Resi games over the years, but instead of the look that RE4's castle had, this one looks a lot cleaner, if that makes sense. It also feels a lot more confined. It feels less like a room full of traps. I don't know. I feel like Castle Dimitrescu feels a lot more intricately detailed and like a place people actually lived in. Not to say that this is a bad thing or any means for Castle Salazar. I don't want that to be misconstrued, but more so to appreciate the difference between the two castles. And I like that despite taking an already used idea and doing something a little bit more fresh with it, I appreciate that a lot. House Beneviento slows the game down a ton, but especially on a first playthrough, I really love what it tries to do. The opening of this whole segment, though, honestly, it kind of feels like Diet Coke Silent Hill 2. I can't be the only one that thought that. Like, it's just kind of funny. The reservoir kind of blows. I'll keep it a buck. I think this and the cave with the lichens are kind of just the worst parts of the game. They bring the game down a bit, but I won't say they're horrid. I think the whole bridge thing in the reservoir is kind of neat in concept and can be kind of annoying, but I didn't mind it. Though on replays, I think this one was a more of a pace killer than House Beneviento was. The factory I actually like. I was a bit let down hearing that people hate this area because I feel like the atmosphere is really trying to reel back in that horror feel. Though I feel like most of the hate for this comes from the enemies being rather annoying with the specific weak spots, and the one guy that has the armor that you need the grenade launcher to blow up so you can actually kill him. I can kind of get it, but these aren't anything necessarily new for Resident Evil. This game kind of avoids the issue that RE7 had for me, where there was just so few enemies, and the enemies that were there were mostly just the same thing with like one tweak to them. However, in Resident Evil Village, there is quite strong visual differences and gameplay differences between enemies. You have the big wolf guys that were most definitely related to the lichens. They still felt and looked extremely different. Then you had the Moraikas and the flying ones. Even if they looked very similar, they still had two completely different versions. Of course, the Moraikas they kind of got a little too used to reusing. Especially when you get to the factory, they just put the fucking metal things over their eyes and it like protects them from headshots. They do throw the armored lichens into here, and that's when I just tell the game to politely fuck off, because armored enemies overall are just not needed in any scenario. I don't like them. I hate when Resident Evil does them. It's like when they put them in Modern Warfare 2, it's like, this didn't make the game harder, just made it more annoying. I do want to acknowledge the boss fights as one of the last bits before we move on, and I think for the most part, they are solid in my opinion. I do know some people found them to be disappointing. I think it's because there's just not as many, maybe? I could even be wrong about that, but I don't know. My favorite's probably Mutated Lady D. I think the Angie boss fight, if you can even call it one, is actually a neat twist, being a hide-and-seek game, but I feel like you just can't lose this, so it's just really easy. Has anyone lost here? I want to know, because even on Village of Shadows difficulty, I just kind of sped through it like it was nothing. It felt very easy, but on the first playthrough, I can kind of get that it feels a little intense, but overall, I think it's just a neat concept more than anything. Morose, I don't think is that bad. It can be a little irritating with the acid rain, but I actually liked the boss fight overall. I think the boss arena wasn't bad, and the gimmick where you gotta hide underneath rooftops to avoid taking damage, and then shooting his weak spot when he opens his mouth, I think that's fine. I actually like that. Heisenberg's boss fight, though, I'm sad to report, I think this one's pretty weak. I find it to be the most disappointing one in the entire game, really. Mother Miranda's is pretty cool. I like the multiple different phases that she has when you damage her, and I actually don't mind the one that limits your vision. I thought it was fun, and she's also a pretty challenging boss fight and a good way to end off the game, in my opinion. Way better than RE7's final boss, I'll say that. Of course, the item shop returns with a new merchant this time as well, being the Duke. And this is the bit I'm going to end on for this game, because he is awesome. Just as charismatic as the original Merchant, and I'd say he has just as many fun lines too. One last note, I swear, I'll be done with Village for today after this. But the soundtrack is probably one of my favorites in the series. I had to throw this in last minute. I keep forgetting to talk about the music, if you haven't noticed. But it gives me the vibes of a Corpse Bride. And it only helps that the game opens on an animation that looks like it was made by Leica that completely sets the tone for the game for me. It feels like I'm playing in a monster movie that gives off the vibes of Corpse Bride and like stuff like Beetlejuice, if that makes sense. Maybe I'm deranged for saying that, but those were the clear inspirations that I took and what I felt from the vibes that I was getting from this game. Even though this game is viewed as Diet Coke Resident Evil 4, which it is, people try to say, oh, this game isn't actually Resident Evil 4. Come on, it is. It is. I still love it to pieces, and even if what I said about this game today probably justifies more of a B or A tier ranking, fuck you. We're placing it at S tier because I feel like defying a made-up rule that doesn't exist. Let's move on to the DLC. Shadows of Rose was the story expansion released for Resident Evil Village back in October of 2022. And it's okay. I remember seeing this get revealed back at E3 2021 with nothing more than a black screen with white text saying DLC was in development and nothing else. What a great way for E3 to go out, am I right? I remember the wait for this DLC after playing the game as much as I did when I first got it, feeling so agonizing. It was pretty clear what the DLC would be about due to the final scene showing an older Rose, so I was always intrigued in how this would go. And while I definitely don't think it was bad, but this DLC felt like it had the most peaks and valleys I have ever seen in an experience so short, at least when it comes to quality. It took me about only like 2 hours and 20 minutes to beat, yet it felt like it was dragging on forever. I don't even think it was an issue due to bad pacing, but more so because I just didn't enjoy the entire gameplay here. Like, I enjoyed parts of it, but then there was other parts that I'm just like, I could have went without. Shadows of Rose feels a bit slower than the main game. Felt almost as if it's trying to be even closer to a true survival horror game. And while I definitely do think the atmosphere was there and the visuals were pretty cool, the general gameplay for half the experience just had me feeling nothing. The combat specifically is definitely some of the least enjoyable, I think, in this experience. You get the starting pistol and shotgun that you can find right off the bat in the main game as your only two options for firearms in this DLC. And they can't be upgraded, so they just feel weak for the entire time. The Lemmy, from what I've seen, in my experience, can kill a regular enemy in like anywhere from 5 to 7 shots. It feels like headshots don't even mean anything. And the shotgun, which only very rarely one-shots enemies, story-wise, I do like the story here. It's been 16 years since the events of Village. Rose wants to get rid of her powers because she's been seen as a freak and can't make any friends. And so this guy she calls K tells her he has an idea of how to change that. He takes her to a lab that has a surviving piece of what looks like the Megamycete, and so she enters its consciousness. And I think this is a neat concept. You get some pretty cool visuals, but it does have you retreading through areas you saw in the main game. Specifically the castle and House Beneviento. You do have some sort of guardian angel named Michael, which is where the writers took the criticisms of the main game and said, check this shit out. So this is Ethan. It's pretty obvious when you play it, about like right after you meet him, it's pretty clear to you that this is Ethan. But she calls him Michael, and they really want to try and like have like a diversion and have it like not be Ethan, but it's so clearly Ethan. And then Miranda, yes, Mother Miranda. Miranda comes back. It's really funny. You end up learning by the end of the DLC that it was not actually Kay. It was, well, he wasn't there. Miranda just lured her here, but then Ethan Walk 'em Down Winters pulls up and just starts blasting. What I was a little surprised by is that they continued having Evie in here. Like, in hindsight, it does make a lot of sense. And then they do this whole bit where, like, she like just starts insulting Rose, which I feel like that is a concept they could have delved in deeper into, but again, it's the DLC, so you're obviously not going to see much more than Evie like just insulting Rose and then starting to loathe herself by the end of it. I think the boss fight was alright with Evie. I didn't think it was that bad. Overall, it's just really funny that they wanted to call him Michael. Like, Rose calls him Michael, and then she's like, why didn't you tell me? And Ethan's like, it's to keep her safe. But really, it's because he took inspiration from Chris. Overall, I think the story is pretty nice, despite the fact that it's very short-lived. I gotta say, though, before I circle back to the gameplay one last time before moving on, I gotta say, that final boss fight with Miranda was pretty cool. I don't know if I'd say I prefer it over the base game, but I actually do like that it put an emphasis on her powers. Like, sure, the whole thing with her trying to get rid of the powers, and then the moment she does, it doesn't last long. She just gets her powers back anyway. I think, yeah, with it being a DLC, it's not going to be paced that well at that point, but I genuinely do enjoy the boss fight from a visual and gameplay standpoint. I think visually it's so good, especially when it switches to the red sky, and then you have the different powers where you like just parry like the orange ball and then slam the ground to like punch her or something, and then you could just like the way you dodge, it's so cool. I love it. Back to the gameplay side of things, of course, as I just mentioned, Rose does have her powers, which is cool. We get to play as someone with actual powers that isn't just reattaching limbs. You use it for getting out of certain situations to progress the game, and that is about 95% of what you will be using it for. You can also use it to destroy these cores that have vases and other stuff trapped to get ammo or whatever, but you can also use it on the enemies. You have limited uses that require the white herbs to be used to replenish each use. I think if you use one, it just is a full, but like when you had 3 uses, it would only give me 2, so I'm not really sure how that works. By the end of the DLC, you have 5 uses. However, using it on an enemy is just a stun, which can be really effective if you can group enemies together, which is sort of when you will actually be able to have the option if you want to run or fight. It does end up making up for the weak weaponry, in my opinion, actually. But I think when you get to House Beneviento is where the DLC peaks for me. They do a similar thing here that was done in the main game, making you defenseless, except instead of having a giant baby, you got the Weeping Angel mannequins, which on a first playthrough, this was amazing. It was intense, it was anxiety inducing, it was great. It doesn't last very long, but towards the end of this like 2-minute segment, more of them show up. They are somewhat fast, but it's definitely manageable, and it's not that hard in my opinion. But it does feel a little disappointing that they dropped this segment so fast to move on to the dolls that you have to stay out of their vision for, which yes, you can also stun these guys, which last a good bit, but then a giant mannequin starts hunting you, which doesn't act like the ones you dealt with earlier. It just hunts you, and the stun lasts for like half a second. It's not bad, but it's just to further explain why I think this DLC has so many peaks and valleys when it comes to quality. Like, you'll have the Weeping Angels, but then you'll move on to the giant mannequin that runs after you, which yes, you do get shrunk for whatever reason. I don't know. It's very funny, but it also looks weird. You get a higher like field of view, sort of. It's weird. While I don't dislike this DLC, this is definitely one I do not see myself ever playing again. But compared to most of what's released as DLC in the series, it's not horrible. I'm gonna put it in B tier. Moving on. So, I never got to play RE-verse, and the servers have been dead for like over a year. Yeah, let's put an S tier. Why not?
Resident
Okay, so I actually really like this one. Resident Evil 4 Remake, released back on March 24th of 2023. I learned that this one has a fair share of haters, and I can kind of get it right. These remakes had the toughest mountain to climb with remaking what I consider some of the greatest games to ever be put on a disc. But this one felt different. RE2 felt a lot more like an adaptation or a reimagining rather than a remake due to feeling so much different than its original while also still being great at what it was going for. And RE3 did none of that, and just kind of fails to the point of feeling like a generic action game that just so happens to feature Nemesis getting bullied for 4 hours. But RE4 here just kind of feels like a remake. It feels like a modernization of Resident Evil 4. There's a ton of changes, yes, but at its core, it still feels like my favorite Resident Evil game, even if I have a couple problems with it, which I'll talk about. But for that, you already know where I'm putting it. It's weird too, because this game I didn't really have much of any feeling towards when it came out. At the time of release, I had gotten my first paycheck from my job, so I immediately hit up a GameStop and got myself Dead Space Remake and RE4 Remake. It's looking bleak, I know. And I went for RE4 first when it came to playing games and getting them cleared off my backlog because it was the one I should have had more interest in. And I just felt absolutely nothing. It's not even like I disliked the game, quite the opposite. I thought the game felt great mechanically, but it was just kind of, you know, I played it and I moved on. You know, I didn't feel any type of way towards it. It wasn't until I replayed the game after replaying the original that I truly fell in love with it. I do have my issues, as I said, not many. The one big one I have is probably the inconsistency in how staggering works. While I was eventually able to get over it, and I do understand that if it worked anything like how the original was, then I think the game would have been a complete cakewalk given its new movement mechanics, quick swapping, which yes, quick swapping is in the game. I love that. But I feel this is more just a personal preference for me rather than something that's like, oh, the game's fucking terrible. No shade to the people that hate this change specifically though, because even on professional and hardcore, oh my god, the game feels almost unbearable at times. I can totally get being upset with these changes. For me personally, it's not game ruining, I guess, is my point. The story got a huge overhaul, and while it is at its core the same story as ever, the tone feels a lot more serious. And this is the one thing I just outright prefer the original for. I don't dislike the change in tone, not at all. I like it, I appreciate it. It gives the game a much more different experience, so despite being a remake, it feels like I'm playing something slightly new. And because I also like some of the performances here, mostly just Louise, Leon, and Krauser. Every other performance I feel like is either on par or just kind of below the original. Actually, I think Krauser's about probably a little bit below the original one for me as well. I didn't vibe with the two big villains in this game as much as I did in the original, those being Sadler and Salazar, and that's just kind of disappointing in my opinion. Sadler in the remake almost feels like he doesn't even have a presence at times. It feels like there's less of him in the game, and even if there isn't, his screen time doesn't really feel meaningful ever. He feels like he got dialed back way too much, and maybe it's to make the game feel more serious and be taken more seriously, but it doesn't work for me because he doesn't end up feeling like a threat. Salazar is also just kind of meh for me, mostly because he doesn't have any interactions with Leon that feel entertaining, even if I think his performance is overall pretty good. But again, I don't think either of these guys are bad per se. We've seen a worse villain in the series, don't get me wrong, but I miss the cheesiness and the lines from the original game that these two had. Luis, on the other hand, gets a lot more screen time, and I actually liked him more this time around. Though I do have a hot take. I don't hate Ada Wong in this game. I know. Crazy opinion. I still remember the controversy back when the game first came out, and I just think it was completely overblown. Do I think her performance was good? No, I think it was pretty weak, don't get me wrong, but this was much deeper than just the voice actress being bad at her job. I mean, her mic quality was atrocious. It was like they forced her to record into a tin can. I don't know how this went unnoticed by the community, let alone the developers. Let's get back to the gameplay side of things though. It's fantastic. I mean, despite my personal grievances with the staggering, it's really just that good. My favorite part about everything though is the changes to the merchant. It's about what you expect from him, but he has these requests posted around that reward you in spinels, which in the original used to be just a regular treasure you could sell back, but now they are reserved for exclusive rewards like treasures that can fit gems into them for a higher sell value, the Punisher, treasure maps, attachments, attache cases. I love this. This adds more to the exploration and overall gameplay. Even incentivizes backtracking to areas you were just in and can extend your playtime by quite a bit if you care about what he's selling. They do reuse the Blue Medallion quest quite a bit, but it's also kind of iconic for the original game, so I'm not bothered by it. Some of the other ones have you just selling items like snakes and whatnot, and then other ones have you fighting stronger targets as kind of like bounties, like a strong dog or a golden knight that I think Capcom forgets just can instantly die to flashbangs. The general combat just feels a lot faster while also giving the option for more stealthy play with sneaking up and stabbing enemies quietly. However, they added a parry, which I'm gonna be honest, I don't really care for this mechanic. Like, it's not a bad one. It's just not my favorite one to have in games, but I do think it can be really satisfying to pull off. However, this did lead to them adding the durability mechanic from RE2 Remake into this game, and it's fine. It's whatever. I don't care much for it. I mean, it's annoying, yeah, but like they give you the ability to upgrade your knife, which I thought was pretty neat, so I guess it's just a trade-off. The boss fights, for the most part, feel just about the same for me. I think the Del Lago fight feels a bit better in the remake, personally, and I think Salazar gets a huge facelift with his boss fight. I think it just feels a lot better. It feels more aggressive in his attacks and leads to a more challenging fight. Sadler is still boring and easy, though. I just don't know why they don't know how to make a boss fight for him. I saw a lot of people arguing online over whether the initial knife fight with Krauser was better or worse than the original. And can I be honest? I don't care either way. They turned a cutscene cluttered with QTEs into a parry simulator. I didn't like it then, and I still don't really like it now. I just feel more involved in the cutscene than I did back in the original. I do like his mutated boss fight though, let me say, because I don't want to seem like I'm a complainer, but it was pretty fun, just like it was in the original. This game adds charms that you can get for your attached case. These are dumb. You can unlock them through getting these medallions, which can be achieved by scoring high in the shooting range, and they do provide some benefits, yes. Some of them are even good. But why the hell can you get duplicates and not even stack them? In terms of the level design, it feels mostly the same. There is some changes like the dining room, table puzzle, and probably some other ones that I don't really remember, but none of it feels like it ruins the experience or catches me off guard by how bad it is. It still retains a lot of what I loved about the original. The island still blows though. I just don't get it. How does it still feel like they just threw a bunch of bullshit on the screen and called it a day? A lot of people think this part is improved over the original, and maybe that is true. Maybe I'm just over exaggerating, but this is one of the moments where I kind of wish that they just took more liberty with remaking this game for this spot only, just this one. Hell, you didn't even have to abandon the militarized island idea. I think you could have still worked with this. This game might just be the most faithful remake ever made. It took the most boring segment of the original that felt like it was dragging on too long and did it again. I don't even dislike this part in the original, but playing in the remake just felt like I was being trolled. Like, how did this part not improve? How did I still not like this part? I forgot to mention the lab part of this island though, but I don't mind the lab part in the original. I think it's pretty good. I like the atmosphere. Even in the remake, I feel the same way. But everything else about the island just kind of felt like I was going through the motions. It's so boring. The armored enemies are annoying. They just don't die, or their shield just doesn't destroy because it's fucking metal. So you're just kind of hoping you can shoot their legs or get a quick shot on their face. Or, wait a minute. The regenerators though, let me tell you, I love these goofy bastards, and I am pleased to see them in this game, and I'm just pleased to see how they look. While I do find them to have a much more menacing and scary looking face design-wise in the original, I like how these guys just bounce and jiggle around. I think they have more extreme jiggle physics than Ada's rack does in the model viewer. That's not a joke, they gave these fuckers jiggle physics. Like, you can physically see their ass jiggle when they hop around. One last thing for the gameplay side of things, the mercenaries in this game, it feels really good. I would probably enjoy it more had the game had a lot more consistency to it, but despite those grievances that I've already mentioned with some of the changes to the combat, I just don't think it's as sprawling as 5 was. I don't think it has as much things to do in it, doesn't have as many maps, doesn't have as many characters or weapons, even though RE4 has a lot of weapons. For the modern games, it's probably the best, but that leads to me hoping that since we will absolutely get an RE5 remake, that I hope they don't disappoint with the mercenaries, since that one was amazing in RE5. The soundtrack in this game, though, I gotta say, wow, they knocked it out the park. I think it might have hit a car driving by. A lot of the remade tracks sound so good in this game. The drive, in my opinion, actually sounds a little better, even if it doesn't really sound that similar to the original version. The save theme is amazing. Serenity is great, but I think this is one of the ones where I definitely prefer the original. Salazar's boss fight, though, that music goes maniacal. It feels so cinematic, and it's probably one of the best ones in the game. but you probably know which one's my favorite. It's the music you hear in the shooting range. This one feels much closer to a remake of the original The Drive track from RE4, yet I think this one eclipses it. It's got such a nice vibe to it. I love the percussion and how well it blends with the guitar in the beginning, and then you get the final stretch, the final third of the song. Good lord, it goes way harder than you think. Overall, I really loved RE4 Remake. While I do think I prefer the original just due to a few small personal grievances and nostalgia, I still think it's about as good. That might be a controversial take, but it did what I wanted mostly, and it's one of the best feeling modern RE games in my opinion. Slotting it in S tier right next to the original, but if it was ordered, it'd definitely be second. But before we move on, we gotta talk about Separate Ways. This garnered a little bit of backlash back at its initial release because it didn't release alongside the base game? What? It might have been a loud minority, and the complaint is still somewhat valid, I think, but I have two issues with the complaints for this. For one, this wasn't even initially made for the game when it came out. It was exclusive to the PS2 for a while until they started packaging it alongside RE4 in every single port going forward. And for two, the original didn't really do much. It was just more RE4 with a segment that would be probably one of the worst if it was in the main game, and then a huge skill check that was much harder than anything before it put at the very end. Now, if you prefer the original over the remake, that's fine, I guess, but I just don't really know if there was anyone that had much interest in this being remade, since it didn't give a whole lot as a side mode. It didn't really add much to Ada's character, I felt. It didn't add much to the RE4's gameplay loop. It had the better Saddler boss fight, I'll give it that, but aside from that, the original just didn't have much going for it. That said, I like this version of Separate Ways quite a bit. Ada's performance is still plagued by the problems of what you see and hear in the main game, yeah, but you get to see certain moments from the main game play out from a different perspective, and it's really well connected into the main story, which the original did, but nothing the original did felt like it added anything. It felt like one of those things where it's like, did you ever imagine these things happening on screen? No. Well, do you want to see them anyway? No? Well, too bad. They even brought back a certain missed boss fight that was cut from the base game. Not missed by me, though. I didn't care for it in the original, but U3, he comes back. I actually like his design, and I kind of like its fight here. And I also like how U3 became the Black Robe in this DLC, and he kind of hunts you during the DLC. And I overall enjoy his final boss fight. And I don't mind all the run-ins you have with him when he's the Black Robe before you get the U3 reveal. I think it's great. I simply just like that despite taking place during the story, it doesn't just simply rehash the main game. It feels like something new. It actually adds to the game. Though I don't see myself playing it over the main game, I absolutely love it for this. Then there's the grappling hook, which was neat, but I kind of see it more as a gimmick than a useful gameplay mechanic that I can see myself using regularly in combat. And as I already mentioned, story-wise, you definitely do see more into Ada as a character. You see a bit of how she cares about Leon, but man, the voice direction needed a lot of work because yeesh, it was still rough here. It was not good. I think this is one of my favorite DLCs in the entirety of the series. I mean, for $10, you get what was a filler mode to give the PS2 version more to do, a huge facelift, narratively, mechanically, and even in its own level and boss design. I'm feeling like being unreasonable and giving it S tier, but it could be argued to be A tier as well, so I can do either or, but let's finally move on. We finally reached the end, or at least until it gets a DLC, or we get a new remake or something. But Resident Evil Requiem, and what a damn good game it was. released back on February 27th of 2026. And it's a game I actually already covered here on the channel, so if you want my full, kind of just off-the-cuff kind of thoughts of the game that I shared after 100%ing the game, I'll link it below, and it'll show up in that little pop-up thing too. It's a bit more laid back and a lot looser as a video, since I just wanted to ramble about a game I just beat, but I will keep this segment a bit shorter since it exists, but I will still give you guys something to go off of regarding my thoughts of the game to justify my ranking, since you already made it this far, and because I also have slight changes in certain takes that I had. Firstly, when I made my video on Requiem, I was a lot more negative towards the story, but I have mellowed out on it mostly. I just think Xeno was a wasted character, and the thing with Chloe and the clones didn't necessarily feel all that fleshed out. However, I think character-wise, we get 3 solid ones here, with Leon Kennedy arguably at his best writing-wise in this modern trilogy of RE2 Remake, 4 Remake, and Requiem. I think this is my favorite iteration of his character, and they even give him a bit of an arc in this game with his survivor's guilt and feeling like he failed and was unable to save anyone. Grace is my favorite character to come out of this game though. The vocal performance put on by Angela St. Albano, which was one thing that everyone praised about this game, and honestly I say that goes for the game as a whole, but she killed it. It sounded like someone was physically killing someone right in front of her in certain scenes when she's screaming. It was horrifying. I think this is just some of the best voice acting we have ever gotten out of the series. We came a long way from the cheesy, endearing, terrible voice acting from the originals. Victor Gideon is also probably one of my favorite villains in recent memory. Maybe recency bias, but I found the performance put on by Anthony Burns to be so menacing. He can go from very soft-spoken to imposing in what seems like on a whim. I love all the snake iconography associated with him too, if only his final boss fight had him turning into one. Originally, I did make a big issue out of Spencer's interview in the game, as it still does feel like it's breaching onto the lines of a retcon, but at this point, I want to see if they're actually going to go through with retconning that, or if they're just not going to bother changing anything in RE5 at all. On the gameplay side of things, I absolutely adore Rhodes Hill. It is tied with RE1 Remake Spencer Mansion for me in being my favorite location in the series. The layout is so perfect. It has a decent bit to explore and traverse through, while also being just paced well enough to where you can speed through it really quickly. The enemy variety in the game is at its peak here too. You have a couple of stalker guard-like enemies in the Chef and Chunk, covering their respective sides of the facility. Zombies still retain a tiny bit of their humanity, making each zombie feel more individualized. And then you have the 2 singers, which have a really cool mechanic where they seem to awaken zombies nearby if you alert them, and zombies will just follow them anyway. Like if you go into the bar and lounge, you'll see them all just dancing together and then walking around in the hallway. It's great. And while they don't do a whole lot in the main game, they seem perfect for an RE3 style Mercenaries or some sort of minigame that involves stealth. Raccoon City, on the other hand, I think is still great, but it just isn't anywhere close to how well designed and paced Rhodes Hill is. First off, it's very huge. There's a lot to see here, and it's great, especially on a first playthrough. Honestly, I wish RE3 Remake had something to this scale for a not completely abandoned Raccoon City. I just think the enemy variety and combat encounters here are very lacking in comparison to Rhodes Hill. You finally get an entire segment to Leon, and Leon only. And while the gunplay is very good and the mechanics here are again some of the best the series has seen, I just think the lacking enemy variety just drags it down a little, with having you go all around the area looking for parts to a detonator to blow up this gate. It does have its cool moments though, with the knocked over building with glass you can shoot, so it's not all bad, but again, it's mostly just running around. And then some of the encounters themselves just kind of suck. Like in the garage where you're running around in the water, or trudging around in the water, I should say, because oh my god, that sucked. Or the rooftop with the mortars. Yeah, fuck off. I do think the game continues being good once you get to the Ark. You have a lot more enclosed encounters as Leon, and playing as Grace here still has some of that tension the beginning of the game had, even introducing bottles of acid to throw at liquors to melt them. And then of course you get the Hunk boss fight, which I really like, even if it's basically another attempt of the Krauser fight in 4 Remake, but I find this one to be far more challenging. I actually feel like this is a fight where you're put to the test, and of course you can just skip the fight entirely with a rocket launcher if you so choose to, unlike 4 Remake. The game does have its weak spots, like the orphanage, which is just the orphanage from RE2 Remake. It was mindless and had no real stakes or difficulty to it at all. It may be similar in length, but because of how it's designed, it feels a lot longer. There's no real stealth or even puzzles to this segment, which, yeah, the one in RE2 Remake didn't have that much more. But in Requiem, you have to run from these bald children, and you have to hide underneath either a bed or a table or something. All you do is walk up to it, press the button to hide under it, and then you can't leave it, so you can't, like, intentionally kill yourself once you go into the hiding spot. But once a prompt telling you to get out shows up on your screen, that means it's safe to go. So it's basically just push button prompt, wait, push button prompt, repeat. That's essentially all it is. Everything here honestly feels like it could have been put in a file instead, and its purpose honestly would still be served, because this segment as a whole just is not fun to play through on a first playthrough or on repeat playthroughs. The bike segment is absolutely over the top, but I found it inoffensive. I think these segments are fine in short bursts and not at a constant pace like they were in 6, though I do prefer they do a lot less of things like this, personally. I want to bring up the process of 100%ing the game just to have something new to talk about that I didn't say in my original video, but this is probably one of the easiest games in the series to get 100% or a platinum for. It's not easy as in you'll go through it without any pushback, but outside of a couple of annoying segments, even the hardest difficulty, being Insanity, didn't feel nearly as hard as previous games, especially not compared to Village or 4 Remake. I ended up going through it twice just to prove a point, and even though it most definitely gave me more pushback without infinite ammo than it did with it, which is obvious, it just felt more approachable. I think if you can get past the opening in Rhodes Hill with the girl, you can get past any part of the game. Not that it won't be challenging, as it still is one of the most intense experiences I've had in recent years, but if you are a newcomer or aren't as good at these games, I feel like this could be a nice game for you to try in 100%. Then again, I have been playing these games since I was at least 6 or 7 years old, so maybe I'm not the right guy to be saying that. Lastly, I do want to bring up the music because it's really good. I think the music that plays during combat can be some of the most adrenaline-inducing tracks in the series, feeling like something you'd hear in a Doom game, and it works so well. The save theme, on the other hand, well, it's definitely one of my least favorites to come out of the series. It may grow on me over time, but as of now, it definitely hasn't reached my top 5 yet. But with all of that said, I will be placing Resident Evil Requiem in A tier, maybe towards the top because of how recent this game is. It might grow into an S tier title, so maybe in 10 or so years, if I re-rank the games, it might change. But I definitely don't see it going anywhere below A, because I think it's a great game. And that is the ranking. This is how the tier list ended up, and yes, I didn't forget any games this time, or did I? You thought I forgot, didn't you? You thought I forgot Resident Evil Deadly Silence. Well, you'd be right. I did. This game is just a DS remake of the original game from '96, and a pretty damn good one too. Of course, I didn't get to enjoy a lot of what it had to offer, since I refused to give someone on eBay $300 for this game, and because a lot of the new features here come down to like the multiplayer stuff and the LAN related content, which probably would be fun, I don't know. But it's also Resident Evil, which I consider to be a great game. You can even touch Chris's butt in this game. It's going into A tier, sure, why not? And that is the entire Resident Evil franchise ranked on a tier list. I won't lie to you guys, this was a blast to do. Especially with a lot of these games being games I've never played before, mostly just the spin-offs, or just games I haven't ever gotten the chance to finish, or just games that I got a new insight on. So it was really great to see the series as it evolved and changed, even for the worst. But man, do I remember why I don't really make these kinds of videos. This one took the better part of 4 months to work on. I worked on a lot of other things while I was working on this, just because I knew it was going to take forever. Nonetheless, it was a fun time though. And I think that's all from me though. I don't really have many other closing thoughts. Let me know what you think. How would your ranking differ from mine? Like the video if you liked what you saw. Subscribe if you want to see what else I have cooking up, because after this video, I think a new era for my channel is going to begin, and I plan to drastically improve the quality on these things, and for once, stop being lazy. And most importantly, if you enjoyed the video, good. Now goodbye.